Okay, we're now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Linda. Right, hello, councillors. Welcome to today's meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is to receive declaration of interest under procedural rule number 8. Are there any? Ken?
Yes, it's as regards agenda item 11, Cabinet Armed Forces Covenant. I'm a Royal Air Force veteran and I receive an Armed Forces pension.
Thank you, Ken. Anyone else? Nope.
Mr. Beadle.
Mr. Beadle?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a director of a company who is receiving government support.
Ms. Catchpole, I think.
Thanks, Stuart. Sue?
Did you have your finger up? Unmute. Oh.
You there, Sue?
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, I thought there was something in here about the Bure Valley Railway. And,
There is, yeah.
That's in one end of it is in Aylsham. And as a district councillor, that's to declare.
Yeah, just to declare that I'm ward member for Aylsham. There's no pecuniary interest involved in that. Thank you. Anyone else? Fine. Proceed to item number 2. Apologies for absence. James, could you declare any?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Ryman Tubb and Councillor Sue Holland, and Councillor Holland's substitute is Councillor Karimi Guvanlu.
Thank you, and thank you, Caroline, for attending today. Right, move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of March. And again, as usual, as I go through each page, if somebody has and this is about true record, of course, not about matters arising from it. If anybody wishes to make a point in terms of it being a true record on each page, please again just indicate with your finger, and then you can put your point, and we will consider it. So on page, page 1 of the, it's actually page 5 in your agenda pack, page 1. Giving you a few moments to read. Page 2, going over, which is 126, local authority commercialisation. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Meeting closed at 11:48. Is it a true and correct record, councillors? Agreed? Thank you. Right, moving on to Chairman's announcements. Oh, sorry, matters arising. Are there any matters arising? Sarah?
Yeah, just to confirm, on minute 124, it talks about the recommendations made by the committee. Just to let committee know, that will be presented to your next meeting on the 30th of June, along with your draft annual report for 1920.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other matters arising?
Councillor Nurdin.
Nurdin.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Yes. I was just trying to get a message through to Sarah just to establish it's under overview and scrutiny work program. There is mention that the apprenticeship time and task panel would meet in due course. Just to report that the final report for the EcoCube time and task panel project has been completed. And I wanted to establish from Sarah when it would be presented to overview and scrutiny.
Can I answer? Yeah, just to confirm again, that will be going to the 30th of June meeting. that's what we call your sort of normal scrutiny meeting. So rather than take it to this one, you've obviously got a lot on the agenda already.
Brilliant.
Okay.
And also as well with the cabinet agenda, it makes a lot of sense doing it that way. So thanks for that. Does that clear your point, Councillor Nurden? I take it has. Any other matters arising? None? In that case, I will move on to Chairman's announcements. I don't believe I have any, unless the officers remind me that I have. 6, public speaking, James.
There's no public speaking.
Okay. Item 7, cabinet reports. And if you turn to page 25, item 9, review of 2020-21 budgets. Could the officer reporting on this please attend and report?
Thank you very much, Councillor Riley. I believe it's myself to present this report, if that's okay.
Thank you, Rodney. Could you just say your name, because we are live streaming?
Rodney Fincham.
And your position, Rodney?
I'm the Assistant Director for Finance and the Council Section 151 Officer.
Thank you very much, Rodney, and very much welcome as usual. Please fire away.
Right. Thank you very much, Chair. So very much with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is sensible and prudent to look at the impact that this is having on the council's budgets. And this paper very much takes us through the review of the council's budgets in the light of the issues being raised. So it's quite a long report with various sections. So what I'd like to do is take you through a couple of sections and then pause for questions after each couple of sections, just to make sure we can break it up and have the questions at the relevant points. So very much the first section is about section 2, which is all about the impact on the council's budgets for 2021. So obviously as part of this, we are having an impact on potentially our planning income and potentially our ability to recover housing benefit overpayments. So the table in paragraph 2.2 very much suggests that we need to rebase our 2021 income budgets to reduce them by £430,000 this financial year. Some of these changes will be lost forever, income lost forever, but other ones like the planning income, this is where we think actually there'll be a delay in when people submit planning applications. But as our developers are still keen on actually developing in the area, it will just be delayed for future years. So although it's a lost income in this year, we're hoping that by next year things will pick up again. So very much we'll be asking Cabinet and then on to Council to amend the 2021 income budgets in line with the figures in this table. Moving on to the second section, this is about the impact on our expenditure budgets. So obviously the Council as a whole has made a response to COVID-19, and as a result we wish to increase our budgets. We want to increase the budget by £250,000 just as a general allowance to cover all our COVID-19 related costs. But also we're having specific costs within housing. So again, we're requesting, or will be requesting, we increase our housing budget by £250,000 in order to meet these additional costs through COVID-19. Section B of this section is then suggesting about the work that's been done, what we called it Operation Beacon, to start opening some of our towns and village centres. So we're doing some work to make sure that streets can open safely, so providing additional hand washing facilities and changing the layouts where necessary. So we were expecting to have to put some money aside to cover these costs, but the government announced the other day a new £50 million fund to support the recovery of our high streets. And out of this, the government has allocated ourselves £116,000 worth of money. So we're suggesting we'll be using this grant funding to cover this work. And if we need to spend more than the £116,000, then we'll be coming back to members again, asking for additional funding. We're also suggesting there's going to be pressure on the council's budgets due to council tax support, with obviously the number of people sort of out of work increasing. We've already seen a 70% increase in the number of council tax support claims being processed. So again, there'll be pressure on this budget throughout this year. So again, this is where we're expecting or asking for members' approval to increase our budget for council tax support by £224,000. I think if that's okay with you, Chair, I'd like to pause there for any questions on those bits, because this is very much about the pressures for reduced income and the pressures for additional expenditure.
Yes, thank you, Rodney. And of course, you do need to come back to the council, because we did have a set budget, and just to make just so all council are aware why this is occurring, because you know, there is actually law around this in terms of set budgets. So we do need to actually review this under the current situation. So I'll open up for questions.
Councillor Loudon was first.
Far away.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Rodney. Quite a comprehensive report, as always. Thank you very much for that. Just going through some of the paragraphs. Right, 3.2 on page 27. You said there that the council is incurring additional costs in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, primarily on communications with residents and businesses, and then additional with regard to homelessness or homeless people, and then IT costs in respect of software to facilitate grant payments. I was a little bit puzzled about communications with residents, why we would need an additional £250,000 for communication and software to facilitate grant payments, and then we've said 250,000 for the homeless. So just a little bit of clarity on those two, the communications and the IT software costing £250,000. Right, and then I go on to, so my second question relates to paragraph 3.11, costs of council tax support. You've got methodology, you've got 4 months based on a 50% increase, and then you've got 4 months based on a 25% increase, and 28,000 a month times 4 months, and then 28,000 a month times 8 months. And of course, both calculations will get up to the £224,000. Why have we got those two calculations when we're trying to get to one particular amount? So that for now is just two or three questions that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Rodney, would you like to respond, please?
Right, so firstly, the increase in our budgets, these are very much our best estimates at this time, and very much this is a long-term project. This is not a immediate sprint. It is this recovery will take a long while. But to put it into some context, the cost of doing our first county-wide mail shot was £28,000. So actually you can see that actually doing a mail shot to all the residents is quite an expensive thing to be doing. And then looking at our actual homelessness costs, already in March and April, I can see we've nearly had £25,000 worth of additional costs relating to homelessness. So you can see we've already quite easily spent £50,000 just in March and April. Thinking this is going to be going on for a few more months, you can see it's quite easy going to be building up to the sort of level of £250,000. But it is very much our best estimate at the moment. It could be less, it could be more, but we need to make a prudent estimate. Your second point was about the council tax support. Again, this is very much an early estimate. As I say, we've had a 70% increase in claims so far. However, as we're expecting the furlough scheme to unwind, it is quite possible that there'll be a latent increase where people are taken off furlough and actually made redundant. So again, this is a potentially a worst case scenario, saying it could significantly peak a lot higher than the 17% that we've got at the moment.
Okay, Rodney, you covered the point you wish.
Okay, to move on.
Councillor
No. Hold on, Rodney. this is actually clarifying on this section, Councillor Nurden's points. So before we move on to the next section, just hold on.
Councillor Bullman had a question too.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just get Peter down. Hold on. So Grant, are you happy with that response?
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Yes, I was tried to show a thumbs up, but of course you're not able to see that. So yeah, no,
thank you. Thank you very much. Because again, just in terms of scrutiny, we do need to clear that that's been now covered and scrutinised, which it has been. So thank you very much, Grant, and thank you very much, Rodney, for the answer there. Moving on to Peter. What was your question, Peter, please?
It's a two-part question, if I may.
Yes.
Homegrown. Firstly, can you do a sum, please, to avoid me having to do it, of where we're losing income and where we're incurring costs, leaving aside where we're getting government grant, and what are we going to do to address those increased costs that we're going to have? There's a second question, but I'll leave that. Come back to them later.
Rodney?
Yep. Right. I'll come back to this point actually later in the paper. That's where we've got the update of the medium-term financial strategy. And there is a chart later on in the report which shows all the movements where we think are affecting this year.
Okay. So your second point, Peter?
So very much it would be paragraph 7.7 where you can see all the changes affecting the current year. But as I say, I will come back when we get to that section.
In that section, you could also clarify, Peter, as well. So what's your second point, Peter?
In 3.5, we're on page 27, we're talking about a lot of changes to the public realm. I'd be fascinated to know what we might have in plans and where they might be, because I would wholly support that.
Rodney?
I must admit, I'm not close enough to the detail on that to actually be able to provide a comprehensive response at this meeting. I think we may need to come back to that after the meeting.
Well, can I make a point that we do come back to that, because I think there would be some excellent proposals to improve the high street, and I'm sure we'd like to endorse them and see them rapidly implemented.
Just in terms of clarification around this, these proposals, if there are any so proposals, there is of course a constitutional way for that to be dealt with. So I'm just also looking at Sarah here in terms of the monitoring officer. So I'm guessing that the routes for that could be back through to cabinet and then back through ONS via that route. Sarah?
What in that particular, the last point?
Yeah.
You're talking about that Mr. Bullman made.
Yeah. And that Rodney said that those plans aren't finalised yet. So when plans are, it may be the case that if they're of a nature that requires cabinet decision, or scrutiny, or full council determination, they are the routes for that, Peter. So at that point in time, we will have that opportunity.
If I may, Chairman, Operation Beacon has been to the Economic Success Panel recently and was recommended to Cabinet. So we'll be going through the Cabinet process and be coming to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
All right, thank you. Oh, okay, Peter, so I think that sort of covers the point.
Councillor Catchpole has a question.
Yes, Sue, fire away.
Just as a point of clarity, at the end of last week, beginning of this week, we received emails from our liaison officer. Well, we received an email for the one for Aylsham, explaining how far they've got with those arrangements, and they are trying to get those in place. This is the change in street layouts, etc. They're trying to get them in place by the 15th of June. So if anybody hasn't had those emails from their liaison officer explaining what is happening in their local town or village, I suggest they might need to investigate quite quickly.
Okay, thanks, Sue. On this section, is there any other member that'd like to ask a question?
I would ask, can I ask Councillor King to put his video on, please?
Yes, I said on my small screen, I can't even see that he's at the meeting at the moment.
Just to confirm, Chair, it's Emma Hodds here. Apologies for the delay in joining the meeting. I've had a discussion with David King and he's unable to put his video on at the moment, which is absolutely fine because legally he has to be heard and doesn't need to be seen. So he's okay to stay in the meeting without his video on.
Okay, and just covering the point, Emma, thanks for that. Just in terms of the covering the point process on debate and in decision making, I think that David is going to have to put a question into the box then into that case for Leah or Linda to pick up for me, and then when it comes, if there is a vote, clearly we will pick that up in that way as well, because we can't see him, and when it comes to debate and voting, we're actually going to indicate by hand first of all and then take a roll call on it. So that would cover the fact that he hasn't got a video on, I believe. Okay, so just to confirm, Chair, apologies, just to confirm, for voting, you're just doing a show of hands, not a roll call, or you're doing both? What we're trying to do is keep the meeting as usual. So when it gets to the point of say, a recommendation, I'll ask if it's been agreed, and unless there's an indication that people wish to go to a vote with a proposal to do something else, then that would be the case. If there is, and when I say agreed, people will put their hand up as well. If that is the case, then we have to do a roll call constitution, as you know, Emma, in terms of recording that vote. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, I'm happy for David to indicate to Linda his vote on the matter, and obviously if we do go to roll call, he's able to speak on the matter. Thank you, Emma. Very, very helpful. So I'm moving on to the next section now for Rodney. Fire away, please, Rodney.
Thank you very much. So now moving on to section 4 of the report. Obviously, as part of the review of the council's position, it's important to also consider the impact on Broadland growth. So section 4 of the report very much sets out, following our initial discussions with Broadland growth, their impacts. At the moment, they're still reporting that are on track to develop as they were, but obviously there are risks in Broadland growth with the housing market, potentially fewer sales, but actually there is no substantial issues to report back on Broadland growth at the moment. Section 5 of the report is then probably one of the more interesting sections of the report, and this is where obviously we've received £1.3 million in government funding. We've already said we need to use some of that to cover our lost income and our additional running costs. But there's some more discretionary areas where we could allocate some of this money to. And this section of the report very much highlights some of these issues. So the first section is very much on the hardship funds. To start with, we allocate £100,000 to cover direct payments to residents who sort of incurring significant hardship. At the moment, that budget is sufficient. With regard to the £150 council tax support that we're obliged to offer to all working age people, at the moment we're seeing this budget coming under pressure. So we were provided with £637,000 of this money to cover this. We've actually think we're going to be awarding £442,000, and say we really only leave £95,000 for any additional awards we need to make for the rest of the year, which we think is not going to be sufficient. So we're recommending to members that we need to set aside another £100,000 to cover this pressure. Then got discretionary housing payments. So this is where we make short-term payments to people if they're in housing pressure. For instance, if they can't afford their rent and they're looking to move to a smaller property, we may give them a short-term discretionary housing payment. The government, through the DWP, does give us a grant towards these costs. We are thinking this could come under significant pressure later in the year as people are finding their circumstances have changed. But at the moment, we're saying it's too early to come back to members to say whether we'll need additional money or not on that. We've then had some additional requests. The Bure Valley Railway, obviously they've had to close because obviously the impact of COVID-19. At the moment, they pay us £30,000 a year rent. As they have sort of had their business rates deferred for this year or been relieved. And obviously there is a question whether or not we provide them with additional funding support at the moment. but the suggestion is that actually we need to work with them a bit more closely to understand their reopening plan before actually immediately saying we'll provide some more funding for them. But obviously that is a member decision. The crisis has also emphasised the importance of broadband in the area, because obviously a lot more people are working from home, people are schooling from home. So again, this may be an opportunity for members to say, do we need to look a bit more about investing in broadband in the area? Or again, we're suggesting that actually we need to be looking through the SIL investment fund to look at this. The other section is about we need to be aware of the pressure that has been put on our town and parish councils as well. So at the moment, town and parish councils haven't received any additional funding from government to respond to COVID-19. So the Secretary of State did rather helpfully or unhelpfully, depending on your viewpoint, suggest that if they were under funding distress, they should approach their principal council for support. As yet, no council has approached us for funding, but very much we just need to be aware of that issue. But I think, again, that is then a good point to pause for questions and comment, very much either on the impact on Broadland growth or on the requests for additional discretionary funding areas.
Thank you very much, Rodney. So we'll open it up for questions. I can see you, Caroline, actually, this time.
So, I think Councillor Nairden was first.
Oh, was it? Thank you very much. So Grant, you first, then Caroline, and then Sue Bruton. Is that correct, Linda?
Yeah, and I'll just check the other screen. Yes.
Brilliant.
Anyone?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right, okay. So thanks, Grant. If you'd like to fire away.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, a comprehensive report on this section. I just wanted to go on to B of the request for additional funding, and that's the Bure Valley Railway. It says that the BVR is a much valued business and it's important to our leisure and tourism offering in Broadland. Yeah, I accept that the BVR is, but how is it any different from Roar or Bewilderwood, or in my particular case, and of course my concern is for Pettitt's Animal Adventure Park in Reedham. And I assume that the £25,000 grant was given to the BVR just as much as it was given to Pettitt's, but with just as much as the BVR is struggling because it's had to close down, so has Pettitt's had to close down. So I'm wondering why we have got a special section dealing specifically with the BVR, and why we haven't got that as a general thing with regards to all leisure businesses in Broadland. And then I go on to section D, which is the payments to town and parishes. And I was wondering whether the money that we are considering, because the town and parishes are supporting their communities, and what about the community groups that approach the parish councils for the funding? Is that are we going to now, because it says here, thus loans to help cash flow could be offered if necessary, and I'm just wondering whether it shouldn't be in the form of a grant that we would be giving to the town and parish councils, where they are funding the community groups which are helping the community with regards to emergency needs and that sort of thing. So those are just the two areas that I wanted to ask Rodney about. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. Would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think the key point to note is very much we've received £1.3 million in funding. That is not going to support everything we might like to do. So there's going to be some hard decisions for members about what to support or not. With regard to the Bure Valley Railway, that was put in there because actually they did have approached the council to ask if the rent could be waived for the whole of the year. I think they're different because actually they rent the railway off ourselves, so actually that was the direct approach. But Councillor Nurden is quite correct. Actually, there are other businesses in the district that would also be struggling financially, and again, you could quite easily make a case that there should be funding for them. But again, in the context of we have got limited resources, members will need to actually be careful where they decide to allocate money. But you're quite right, we could expand that to actually there are lots of other good worthy causes in the district that would be worthy of funding if it was available. With regard to the, oh sorry, did you want to come in there, Councillor Riley?
I'll let finish, Rodney, and then I'll just ask clarity on something. Sorry, I've actually didn't mean to interrupt then. Sorry, far away, Rodney.
And the second point was about the payment to town and parish councils. I think, again, this is very much one, until we get an approach from a town or a parish council, it's difficult to have a blanket response, because very much an individual parish could be affected very differently to another one. So it all depends on their individual circumstances. So again, at the moment, we're just suggesting the approach should be actually, if they do approach us, we'll look at whether they can actually fund their pressures through their reserves or actually increasing their precept as the starting approach.
Right, sorry if I can just go back on that. Effectively, the government is giving money and it's given this 1.3 million pounds. Therefore, why should, if Broadland's not using its money to support the community, then why should the parish use its reserves in order to fund something that the government is actually has allocated money for? So that's really the crux of my question.
Yeah, thanks, Grant, and perhaps, Ron, if you could just expand on that for us, please, just to clear that up.
Again, it would be a valid decision for members to say, actually, as part of this money we received, we should be allocating some of that to parishes. On the other hand, it's also a valid argument to say, actually, we've got enough pressures in order to spend that 1.3 million just on the services that we provide and the support we're providing. So it's a case of we can't do everything. We either will allocate them services we need to provide, or we'll need to providing some money to the parishes, which will reduce the money we can spend on our services.
Okay, could I just need to clarify, it's a funding point, actually, just to help clarify.
Debbie Lorimer wants to come in, Chair.
Sorry?
Debbie Lorimer wants to come in, please.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. Yeah, come in now, Debbie, because that might actually be helpful. I'm thinking that's probably why you want to come in. So please do address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of add a little bit of more meat on the bones to Rodney, the grant that was given to us was to account for not just our additional spend, but also our lost income. And we will be looking to potentially take money out of our reserves. Obviously, if we give funding in a form of a grant and not a loan, which would be repaid back to parish councils, that means that we'll be taking more money out of our reserves to pay them. So in effect, we are just paying them a grant out of our own money. And we do have quite a lot of town and parish councils that have substantial reserves. Unlike ourselves, we're capped in terms of any increases we put on our council tax, whereas parish and town councils don't have that cap applied to them. So if they needed to raise more money to repay a loan, which is why there is a suggestion that it should be a loan rather than a grant. Hope that helps.
Okie dokie, thanks. Thanks, Abby. So what we're talking about here really is, and just clarifying this with Rodney again on the points that's being made, and the limitations of this 1.352 it's limited. And the points that Debbie makes around reserves, etc. What we're really talking about, I think this is what you're pointing to, Rodney, is it's a judgment call, isn't it? It's a judgment call for the Cabinet and possibly ONS in terms of what do we do here? You know, where do we focus that? And I believe what you're saying is, well, we're focusing in this way because that's where we're getting the request from as a driver. So where's the driver coming from? And the driver's coming from that direction. Would that be, I'm seeking to clarify, you see, would that be what you're saying, Rodney?
I think that's a good summary, yes.
Okie dokie.
Councillor Riley, okay, Councillor Catchpole is asking, I'm not sure whether she wants to ask a question on this item or if that's okay, because she's not on the list, but if you want to take a...
So yeah, it's just on the funding point. So again, we're ONS here. So I'll just clarify first of all, so if it's on this, if it's on something else, and I'll come back on to you. Is it on this?
Yes, it's on the BVR.
Thank you. Oh, right, okie dokie. Yeah. This is on the point that's been raised by Grant, is it, or is it a completely different point on BVR?
It's a more general point about businesses.
Right, if you could just hold
for...
the general point on BVR then, because this is a funding point at the moment. If you hold that, and obviously I'll let you back in on the BVR, yeah? So moving on to the next member, Caroline, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, it's regards to the £150 council tax support. Could Rodney confirm that the issues with Capita have now been resolved and that money is actually getting to the claimants, please?
Rodney?
Unfortunately, I can't confirm that because we're still waiting for the software fixes to be done. So again, we are having issues with actually reducing the people's council tax bills by this £150. However, anyone who will have this reduction, we are not claiming money from them. So actually they are not being financially penalised because we haven't been able to provide this relief.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And next, sorry, Sue, you was next. Sue Pruton.
Yeah, Susan Prutton.
Sorry, Prutton.
It's pedantry. I'm sorry about this, but paragraph 5.9, please could the typists, the typos be corrected, because on the second line it said we'll be awarding £150 discounts to all new working age claimants. Clarification, please. It is only typing, but it's a working document that I'd like to see corrected. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Is that understood, Sue's point, Rodney?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, absolutely correct. That's a typo.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sue. Right, Sue Catchpole, on with you with the BVR.
Thanks, Chair. It's a point that we've been receiving the Facebook posts, etc., out from Broadland. We've been readily passing those on to our residents, and obviously a lot of that has been about encouraging businesses to ask for support. So I feel that we ought to be very careful if we're saying we have a business here, the Bure Valley Railway, who have asked us for support in a way that I guess they have seemed to be fairly straightforward, that they pay rent to the Broadland District Council. Can they have that waived? And given that there are negotiations going on, it might be a good idea to be giving signals of positivity about how we're going to give our resources, even if we can't give them the funding, as it says here, the economic recovery team to assist BVR to develop a reopening plan. That does sound positive, but I just think we should make it a very positive experience for the BVR.
Rodney, I don't know if you want to say anything. That I've also got an issue. I've also got a point around the BVR as well. Do you want to respond to Sue or?
I think it's a case that this is a very discretionary areas for members to consider, because one extreme you'd say yes, we should be deferring that rent, and the other extreme actually we should be looking at not supporting them any further. I think this is very much coming at the point from before awarding a deferral of rent, we should understand the issues in a bit more detail. We shouldn't just respond immediately to a request for funding by giving the funding. We need to understand really what the drivers are. Where is the lost income? Actually, are they really having hardship? Do they have any reserve to cover some of this hardship in order to make sure we target our limited resources to the key areas?
Yeah, and if I can just come back on that as well. The point that's being made here in 5.19 is there's already support there. There's also the point that Grant's made as well in terms of other businesses, but also when I'm aware of some other situations actually in terms of some businesses. I think of one very close to me right now actually, where you're having people furloughed. There is kind of assets, reserves, and it all needs to be really taken into consideration. So the point here is where it says prior to considering any request for funding, it is recommended that the economic recovery team look to the asset BVR to develop a reopening plan, and that too, in a way, I agree with you, needs to be in a positive context. That's why I think it's being recommended that the economic team look at the assets, because it's actually trying to work with them. However, in that, if there is clearly financial resource, then we would not want to be having this money pushed down the road where clearly that resource is better put somewhere else because they have the ability to cope with it. If you look at a multinational like Ford Motor Company, they've got all kinds of resources. So they're not a Ford Motor Company, but so I can understand Rodney's point here and support it in terms of, the team do need to have a detailed look with them to see what the requirements are, and also, of course, their asset base as well in terms of that. And that's not a negative thing, Sue. It's not a negative thing at all,
Chair, it's Linda, and I don't know, we had Natasha Hartley who waved her hand earlier. I'm not sure whether she has a question, and also Councillor Bullman has raised his finger.
Natasha, have you got a question?
Hi. Yeah, it was before you got onto the Bure Valley. Actually, it was about Capita. I wanted to come in then, but is it too late now?
No, not at all. No. Because part of the electronic issue is we're getting a delay. We're getting a delay anyway. So far away, Natasha.
Sorry. Just a very quick one. At full council last time, we were told that the problems with Capita and the payments should be resolved in a few days to maybe a week. I think it was something like that. It's now what? A month, is it? And resolved, and a statement was issued saying that Capita were put on some kind of warning. What is that warning? What is the outcome of them failing to meet their obligations? That's it.
Thank you, Natasha. Right. In actual fact, I do. When Caroline raised the point, I do remember this actually, but I think it's a valid question actually. So would you like to respond, Rodney?
Can I take a deferral on that one for a minute? I've just tried to contact one of my colleagues to get the latest update on where we are with that. So actually, if I can come back to that, hopefully they may well respond fairly quickly.
Oh, thank you, Rodney. Yeah.
Rodney, as I'm on the call for the housing, did you want me to come in here?
Oh yes, please. I didn't realise you're on the call, Richard. Sorry.
Sorry. Yes.
That'd be excellent.
We're equally as frustrated as members with regards to Capita. We've tested it over the weekend, the release. Capita have finally come with a release. First of all, I'm sorry for the background noise. Me and my wife are working in the same office from home, so and she's on a conference call herself. So we've tested phase 1, and that's gone well. However, for us to go through to phase 2, that's going to be probably a couple of weeks. We're now in a position where we could either go with phase one and therefore have to do a lot of the uprating manually, and that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of officer time to do, or we wait to phase two, which is in 2 weeks. Now, as Rodney said, we have sent a letter to everybody who is going to receive this £150 and told them not to pay any further council tax. We've got lots of, because of the economic situation, we have lots of incoming work. Our incoming work is sitting at about 70% above normal. I do worry if we go through phase one, are we doing it just because of the pressure being placed upon us when those people have been notified of £150 that they're going to receive and therefore need to pay no further money, when we could wait for phase two, which should happen in 2 weeks' time, and therefore the money will automatically, the system will automatically do it for us. It's this is the predicament we're in, and that's the most up to date because that's the email we received yesterday. In respect to the pressure we're putting on Capita, in due course, in the next couple of, I can't give you a time frame, but we will be looking to go into one system over both councils, more than likely. One system is providing very quick turnaround on their software resolutions. One isn't. So that's really the pressure we're putting on people. We will be looking in due course at going into one system, and at the moment you're not doing particularly well, Capita. So really you need to, in the nicest way, buck your ideas, figure out how you're going to be with these issues, because coronavirus and COVID-19 is going to be an ongoing issue, isn't it? So there are going to be software changes needed in moving forwards, and they need to be better at it.
Okay. Thanks very much, Richard. That was very, very helpful clarification. And Natasha, does that clarify the point for yourself, Natasha?
Yes, she's confirmed.
Thank you very much.
And Councillor Bowman was next.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, it's in the context of what Councillor Noden was saying about the Beer Valley Railway and other calls on the authorities' monies. I would like to consider the Beer Valley Railway request in the light of other further competing requests on our resources, because at the moment we have one, and yes, we have a commitment to it, I understand that, and there's probably a good case for it, but we haven't seen it yet. But as has been said previously, there could well be other similar, maybe better cases. So I would like to add to 519 and add a single phrase to it by saying, and furthermore, to consider this request in the light of other competing calls on funding.
Could I just say, in terms of process here, Peter, when we get to, if you could park that, please, until we get to the recommendation, and when we get to the recommendation, we can debate that at that point, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy with that.
Okay. Linda, have you got anybody else for Rodney moves on?
Councillor Murrell, and then Councillor Beadle.
Okay. Councillor Merritt, would you please proceed with your question?
Hi, yeah, I was just going to go to section C on broadband, where it's mentioned about trying to do some additional work, but there's no actual figures based on that. I mean, obviously, as we've said, the COVID's not going to go away. The working structure is going to change for a lot of businesses, and therefore what value can be put to how much we are willing to support the better broadband for Norfolk.
Thank you, Martin. Rodney?
Again, I agree. Broadband is a very big area, sort of thing, and in order to support this, we'd need to get a member steer actually, are you interested in us trying to work up a business case to say actually what could we do, what cost would it be, and therefore be able to make a bid to the SIL infrastructure fund. The other alternative could be to say, well, actually, we have invested significantly in the past in broadband, and therefore we're happy at the moment to not spend some time investigating this further. But again, it's a judgment call as to should this be a priority for the council to investigate over the next 6 months.
Martin, you wish to?
That's partially answered it. There are still obviously no figures as to what needs to be done. I mean, do we need to do some sort of study to look at the broadband coverage? How many people have actually got decent broadband? How many areas are there that have no broadband, especially in some of the remote rural parts of the community?
Again, I would agree that would have to be the first step. As obviously I haven't been with the council that long. I'm not aware of the broadband coverage in the district, but that would be my first step if we were to look at this. Would we say actually what are the issues? What are the remaining issues? And therefore, what needs to be done, if anything?
And just on this point, so I'm understanding the point that you're making, and Martin here actually, and I sort of want to come in this myself. So it's where and who is actually going to have a look at that in terms of judgment call, because in the report it makes reference to this. So how is this actually going to be developed, or so we can come to, so that the cabinet or ONS in the future can come to some kind of definitive position around this, bearing in mind the information, as you said and Mike has said, isn't sort of quite there, at the moment. Rodney?
Well, it would be perfectly within your grasp to say actually you would like more information on broadband coverage in order to actually understand this point better, and that is part of the role of overview scrutiny, to look at issues.
Yeah. So we could take that onto the work programme for sure. However,
Councillor Riley, can I just say we've got some more questions. So I've got Councillor Beadle who's next, then I've got Hartley, Councillor Nurden, and also Councillor Kelly now raising his hand in that order.
Okay, I'll ask you to remind me on those in a second as well. Thank you. Where was I? Yeah, so that could form part of the work programme. I'm actually just looking here at terms of this report and the recommendations around this as well, in terms of the now. So in terms of the now around this with COVID and the immediate 2 or 3 months, because putting us on a work programme is not a short it's not a short route to get to that, if you see what I mean. It's actually quite a long route. So we could deal with this on a work programme, but I'm just wondering, is there a shorter route?
Chairman, Chairman, can I just say I've just checked your work programme and it is already on the work programme. Right. But that was an historical item going.
It's historical item. It's not in the same context.
No, exactly. But there is sort of a general better broadband and mobile phone coverage in the district.
Emma Hodds would like to come in, please.
Yes.
Thanks, Linda. Chair, can I just come in on that point? I think there's some really interesting points been made on this, and it's shown that work is needed. But I think if we look at Rodney's report, it's saying members are asked to consider whether the council should make a bid for SIL Infrastructure Fund. If Cabinet decide that is something that they think that they want to progress, then obviously the work would then be undertaken to look at across the district, where are we with the broadband? What does it look like? Where are our issues? So I would suggest that depending on the decision by Cabinet would then indicate where we need to go with this one, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. And that's actually the point I've been trying to ascertain. So thank you very much. And so we can do 2 things in tandem, can't we? You've got SIL Fund, but you've also got that on our work programme as well. Thanks very much. So are you there, Martin? This was originally your point. Are you happy with that now?
Yeah, I'm happy. If it's taken forward and looked into, then fine.
And particularly the point Emma's raising.
Exactly, yeah.
And we can also have a look on our work.
Once it's been through Cabinet, that's absolutely fine, yeah.
Yeah, that's the still point. That's the important bit there. Thank you. Right, Linda, can you just remind me, because again, I'm not seeing people, who is next on?
Councillor Beazle, he's been very patient.
Stuart, please fire away, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I say this is exactly the point I wanted to raise, you know, when we're actually talking about rural areas being short of broadband facilities, we're looking at businesses being seriously disadvantaged, and also, as the report points out, we're talking about you know, children and students in education also being seriously disadvantaged. And we can actually talk about this, but as we talk about it from month to month to month, people's lives are slipping away, and we are making it seriously difficult for people to progress their businesses and their education. And we ought to take this on as a matter of urgency. So, Chair, I would like to propose that we ask the Council to consider increasing broadband capacity and bidding through the Civil Infrastructure Fund as a matter of urgency, not just talk about it.
Yeah, and the point you mentioned there about the Civil Infrastructure Fund, Stuart. So
yeah, we have an opportunity here. You know, everybody is aware of the effects of COVID, and particularly on the you know, businesses who rely on IT network as well as students. And and as far as students are concerned, it's the ones who are most disadvantaged who are actually hit worst. So we need to do this as a matter of urgency, Chair. Yeah, and as you said, the bid through the Civil Infrastructure Fund is in terms of that connected in the report. I'm just actually looking at recommendations momentarily here. Yeah, we can come back onto that in terms of the recommendations as well. Okie dokie, Linda, I'm again, because I can't see people in the room. Who's the next three people in?
Yeah, so we'll have Councillor Harpley next, then Councillor Nurden, and then Councillor Kelly.
Thank you.
That was
right. Natasha, would you like to fire away?
Yeah, pretty much in agreement with Stuart. You may have been unfortunate enough to have heard me talking on Radio Norfolk actually about the digital divide. Norfolk is one of the worst affected areas in the country. I think in the top 10 for poor broadband in terms of quality and access to it. The government recognised this and promised that poorer student areas would be given 4G routers. This has not happened in some areas, just like with the laptops. The government are backing down on getting all primary school children into school by their set date, so there'll be more school working from home. This is really a matter of urgency because, and as we said before, the poorer students are the ones who are going to be the worst affected because they can't pay private tuition to catch up. So, you know, I've got 3 children who are working from home. Luckily, I have broadband and I can afford to buy them a laptop to do it. But there are others who are a lot worse off than us, and this really can't wait. The longer that schools are in the situation they are in, we can't just keep having this on the back burner to look into later on. And you know, we're in a pretty difficult position here, and we really must look at this as a matter of urgency. So I'm in full agreement with Stuart there.
Thank you, and we can come back on that, picking up from the report and the recommendations. Natasha was just saying to Stuart. Next is Councillor Nurden, I believe. Is that right, Linda?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Cheers. Just a quick question. It follows on from the discussion about the broadband. And I was looking through papers 5 is request for additional funding and support. And it talks there about £1.352 million. Yet in the section on broadband, it's not looking at accessing anything from that 1.352 million. It's talking about something completely separate, which is to do with the funding through SIL. So I'm just wondering, we've got Section A as a hardship fund, B is the Bureau Value, and D is payments to town parish, which is all the potential to be funded from this £1.352 million. So why is this, which is definitely an issue that I do support, why is it included in this section dealing with the this grant money that's coming from government of 1.352 million? So that's just I don't know, a technical question.
Excuse me.
If I can come back on that. So this section is about requests for additional funding or support sort of thing. And obviously one area you could say actually for the broadband, we should provide additional funding out of that 1.3 million. However, we think a better approach would be to use potentially to leverage money from the SIL fund. So it would be an option, and that's why it's in this section of the report.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thanks, Rodney.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the point that Emma originally come on, and Stuart and others are picking up on themselves. This SIL issue is it's in the recommendation, so we've been able to tie that up at the end. And who else have we got, Linda?
We've got Councillor Kelly, and then we have Councillor Catchpole, who's just raised her finger.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Kelly, would you like to for your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll aim this one at Jonathan Lemsel, who's portfolio holder. I've been really pushing since I became a councillor with the IT facilities that we've got at Broadland, even at the local council, and working with trying to sort out with the joint councils. We seem to be getting absolutely nowhere, because even though the resources were thrown at it, if we can't sort out our own in-house IT, why are we going to throw loads of money at trying to do, which we all agree with is really needed within the Broadland area? You know, will we achieve anything if we can't sort our own in-house out? So it's a question for him, please.
Emma's just raised her hand as well.
Yes. I don't even know that Jonathan's portfolio holders in the room. I can't even see that actually at the moment.
I am here, Steve, if you want me to answer,
well,
but obviously Emma's got an answer
I'm just
as well.
keeping my eyes on the agenda as well, and if you're happy to answer that question, Jonathan, then please do before Emma comes in as well.
I think the IT projects that we're working on at the moment have been, we've got some really big things happening, and so that will all be addressed. I know Ken's saying it's been a problem. It has been a problem because our system has been struggling for a while, but now we're working on those projects. Things will be changing, and obviously we want to make sure we've got a system that works for the council and for members. So that will be addressed. With regards to the broadband issues, the Better Broadband for Norfolk is a project we've been working on with Norfolk, and we've been putting money in for years to ensure that the broadband in Norfolk is up and running for everybody. That has been a project we've been working on with Norfolk for years. So the money we've been putting into that has ensured that we are trying to get as many Broadland residents sorted as we can. So our own IT issues, we are now working on some big projects to look at our systems. And I think we've done a lot of work on Better Broadband for Norfolk over the last 2, 3, 4 years. It's been improving. So I think those things are all things that need to improve, but they are things that are being worked on.
Thank you, Jeremy. Emma, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this one because I do think we are in danger of going slightly off topic. But just to re-emphasise what Jonathan has said, I can assure members that the money that was invested, all the projects are underway. I wish I could wave a magic wand and sort it overnight. Unfortunately, these things do take time, but they are all in train and the projects are progressing. I think we do, Chair, though, need to move on.
Yeah, and as you know, we've all been banging on about this one, and 360 coming into place as well. So I can't wait for the day. Yeah, going back to the
last question, Councillor Catchpole.
Yeah, just going back to the report as it stands at the moment. As I've already said, in terms of the broadband issue, this is mentioned in the report rather than members IT. Under 5.24, we can come back onto that on the recommendations. So really need to move on from that now because I think we have covered that point.
Sorry, Chair.
What?
Yeah, my question was...
Sue, I'm going to let you in if you let me finish.
Okay.
So just wait. So in terms of 5.24, we can come back onto that in the recommendations, that point. So would like to move on, actually. So next person in is yourself, Sue. So would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. I was just trying to combine those two things in that the recommendation is that the council should make a bid to the Sill Infrastructure Fund. How long would that take would be my question. And what can we do in the meantime, because there is an urgency about enhancing broadband connectivity for the residents of Broadland, especially given the heightened reliance on use of the internet during this time, as Stuart said, for both businesses and for children and students. So that would be my question. How long would the Sill Infrastructure Fund bid take, and what can we do in the meantime?
Yeah, Roddy, could you just clarify that point for us in terms of time involved on this? This is the original point I was making about we've got a situation now as well. The report is talking about, if we just remember as well, committee, the report is talking about the COVID crisis at the moment. We know in Broadland there's an issue with this, generally speaking. No, John's made points about that. I'm actually on my iPad at the moment because I can't get adequate broadband here to support my laptop. I'm exactly in this boat, actually. So I've complete sympathy for it. But just in terms of page 31 of this report, we are actually talking about the COVID situation as well on this Sill and the recommendation to Cabinet. So if you could clarify that, because it is a point I've raised as well, it's the timing on this. How quickly can this be moved forward, Rodney, in terms of Sill infrastructure funds?
Right. For me, this is all about, this is a starting gate, the no-go decision about whether we do it or not. Because as the Council has mentioned, we have made significant improvements in broadband in Norfolk recently through the Better Broadband Fund. So at the moment, that was the Council's approach. Obviously, this is now COVID-19 has come in and we're saying, does the Council now need to take a slightly different approach? Yes or no? If the answer is no, we're happy with the investment that's been made, then no further work will be done on this matter. Yeah. If, however, you're now saying this is now a bigger issue for the district, then actually the Cabinet will then ask officers to actually start working up some information about what can be done for broadband. But until we start that project, I can't give you timeframes, unfortunately. Okay.
Well, and in the recommendation, we could actually, if we wish to later on, we could actually say this should be done expeditiously and as quickly as possible as a matter of priority for a piece of work. Okie dokie. Somebody's ringing or something here. I can hear somebody ringing or something. Okay. Right. So I think that does actually cover all of this, ready for us to talk about on the recommendation. And therefore, I'm going to move on. The other
Chair, on the point of order, Chair, we've got a proposition that we should promote.
You're not listening, Stuart. You're not listening, Stuart. You're about to do something. I'm saying very clearly that we've not got to recommendation yet. Now, when we get to recommendation, that's the point where we consider proposals in terms of recommendation to Cabinet. So if you could just hold on, Stuart, we'll get there. All right. Okay.
I'm just looking at the agenda papers and I can't see where you're referring to, Chair, that's all.
Well, don't worry, because when we get to recommendations, I always point it out, Stuart. So we get to recommendation, make reference to it. It's actually on page 37, and we'll get there. There's also a point that we've got to pick up from Peter as well in terms of recommendation. We'll get there as well, if you recall. So I'm moving on. Rodney, would you like to finish your
thank you.
report?
Thank you much, Chair. As I think that was some of the trickiest section we covered already. So section 6 was all about the impact on the capital budget. I think we can cover this one quite quickly. Obviously, it's important for us to review the capital budget to make sure we're still on track. And very much the appendix just gives an update on each of the projects and comments from officers. But very much we're suggesting at the moment there'll be no changes to the capital programme as part of this report. Section 7 of the report then said actually not only do we need to consider the short-term impacts of COVID-19, we need to be looking in the medium term and reviewing our medium-term financial strategy. So very much we had a medium-term financial strategy we agreed in February 2020. Very much for the budget for 2021, it was fully balanced. And then we're looking at a future funding gap of about £1 million. We've obviously now gone through and updated our medium-term financial assumptions, and you can see in the table in paragraph 7.6, actually, again, the current year is still just about in balance. There's about a £62,000 difference, and the future funding gap has increased to about £1.5 million. So very much the table in 7.7 explains why this information has changed, how we've gone from the original funding gap to our new funding gap. So very much there's a big short-term issue in 2021 where we've got the additional spending pressures, lost income, but that's very much being covered by the grant. And this is very much, I think, where you come back to the point made earlier by Councillor Baldwin. You can see that actually in 2021, the impact we're thinking is actually there might be pressure on the recycling gate fee. We've got lost income of 431,000, spending pressures, all these things, but then that's balanced off by the government funding of 1.3 million. So overall, we actually think we've got a benefit of £62,000. So the amount we're spending on COVID-19 has been covered fully by the 1.3 million, and we've got this £62,000 floating around at the moment, which is yet to be allocated. But as you can see, it's quite close in the balance. Looking ahead further, we're actually thinking, actually, there are going to be some ongoing spending pressures. The recycling gate fee, we think, is going to be increasing. And also, we think there could be the funding assumptions we made for the government grant could be even tougher than we originally predicted. So actually, in the longer term, we've still got a financial issue going forward. The only thing I would put as a caveat on this is our funding assumptions are very much based on there being no new homes bonus monies coming forward. If that does materialise and we still get money coming forward, this funding gap could significantly reduce in the medium term. But very much this is our planning assumption, and this will be the work we'll be doing over the next 6 months as part of bringing together the 21-22 overall position. But the key point is actually we're okay in 2021, and we'll be doing work looking at the future strategy as part of setting our 21-22 budgets. The next part of the report is about mitigation action. So this is very much just to bring members up to speed on actually some of the work we're doing to actually mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. The big one very much being the staff redeployments. By operating as a one team with South Norfolk, we have been able to be very flexible with the staff. So actually we've been able to reallocate staff to meet the needs, particularly in the help hub. And this is where we've been able to use some of the S&C leisure staff because the leisure centres have been closed. We've been able to reallocate them to very much bolster the help hub facility. And I think those are the key things I want to mention about the mitigation actions. And the final section of the report is very much about in-year savings. Obviously, we've got some additional spending pressures. It's only reasonable that we consider, is there anything we can do in the current year to actually mitigate some of these additional pressures? So officers had a look at the vacancies within the councils, and there's 65 FTE vacancies within the two councils at the moment. So the fact that actually we've had these posts vacant for April, May, and essentially June, there will be a saving within our budgets. There also are some posts that we actually won't need to recruit to for a while. For instance, some of the leisure staff or something we think we're not going to need that for another few months. So again, if we defer the recruitment for some of these posts for a little while, we can make some further savings. And there's also a couple of posts we're now proposing to delete from the establishment. So very much we're saying by looking at our establishment, we can make a salary saving in the current year of £242,000, which will help offset some of the spending pressures. We're also suggesting in here the training budgets. Very little training has been done in the first 3 months of the year. So again, there'll be a saving on some of our training budgets. Looking ahead, we'll also obviously be doing work on looking at our travel and costs like that, because actually the new ways of working will potentially deliver us some savings for the council going forward. I think I will pause there for questions before we just go on to the final bit, would be the issues and the recommendations, which would be for the next section.
Okay, thank
Chairman,
you.
we had Councillor Murrell first and then Councillor Nerdon second.
Okay, Martin, would you like to fire away, please?
Thanks. I just wanted to fetch something up on item 6 on the impact on the capital budget. And then obviously that then goes into appendix 1, and the 12th item down is the contribution to the food hub project. And obviously given the delays and everything and the effect of COVID-19, and that's obviously quite a substantial chunk of the capital budget. Firstly was obviously that was subject to the European grant funding coming in, and there was a lot of work around that and a lot of discussions. Also now obviously there could be quite increased costs. Now we did have at the point of time an allowance for budget creep on that, but I think it would possibly be prudent to review and look at the proposed expenditure on that again, because I think that might come in a lot more. I don't know what everybody else feels.
Yeah, important point, question, Ronnie, because the European grant funding was the essential plank of that, Martin, wasn't it? So Rodney, could you just stress that?
Debbie Lorimer wants to come in.
Debbie, Derry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the outcome from the ERDF bid that we put in is going to be September, October time. That was always the original timetable, and the original budgets that we put in had inflationary in there, inflationary element in there, because we know that costs were going to go up during this period. So that's already been in there. Obviously, we await the outcome of the ERDF funding before we move on to the next stage, and at that point in time we would then relook at the cost then, but I don't think it's worth doing that piece of work until we know the outcome of that funding bid.
Okay, just one point from me on this as well. Thank you very much for clarifying that, Debbie. With the COVID situation not only occurring here but also across Europe, it's hard to say at the moment, but the September date for the funding, do you think there could be any issues there from the the grant body?
At the moment, officers have been in touch with them and we're getting positive vibes. That's all we can say at the moment, but we haven't been alerted that there should be any delay. Right. So, but we are obviously constantly in touch with them.
Thanks very much, because I think that's the essential point, Martin, that you was making. So hopefully that is a situation. You okay with that, Martin? Yeah,
as I say, I think my concern was, are we still going to, given the impact of COVID-19 on Europe, would we then still have that funding available? Does it make the project still viable? And as we knew at the time, with the bid that was put in by the quote that was not from one of the panel, and obviously the increased construction costs that we know will come through because of COVID-19, does it then still make the project in line with how it was put forward? Yeah, but I honestly think that Debbie's clarified that. It's all down to September, and the indications at the moment are it's on schedule. If it's not, then clearly there'd be a cabinet and an overview and scrutiny repositioning around that, no doubt. Okay, so just moving on. Who's next, Linda?
Councillor Nerdon.
Yeah, Grant, fire away, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Just four quick questions. I'll deal with them in the order that they are on the paper. the section 7.4, first bullet point says £360,000 per year has been included in likely increase in MRF fee. Waste is still being collected as normal. Is this something that we have been advised is going to happen, or are we just guessing that there's been a negative impact on the collection? Because as far as I'm concerned, it still carries on as normal. Second question is over the page, impact on funding, second bullet point. Reductions in council tax collection rates totaling that, representing a cut in the collection rate of 2%, 1% respectively. The concern there is, are we going to have to change or amend our service level agreement with the debt collecting agencies, or are they going to, is our debt collection process going to be impacted in any way because of the COVID-19, that we have to change that service level agreement in any way? Third question goes to 8.9. Just wanted to make sure that officers are aware that they need to make sure that they use the proper purchase order process, which is an issue that the audit committee are having. And then the last point or question is to do with the vacancies and what about the research officer for overview and scrutiny? Is that going to happen, or is that one of those vacancies that is going to be scrapped, or is it going to be just put on hold, frozen? And so those are my 4 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. If you could respond, Rodney. I'm just reminding the committee that it's now 11:20:25, so we are falling behind a bit here. We've still got 3 other items on the agenda, and we've got to get some recommendation on this yet as well. Not trying to shortcut the process of scrutiny, of course. But Rodney, if you could respond, please.
Right. Certainly about the recycling gate fee. Obviously, we do have a contract in the shared arrangement with the North for the recycling facility. We're currently under discussion with them, and there's contract negotiations going on. They have indicated that actually they are struggling to make the facility pay, but until the outcome of those negotiations have sort of been resolved, then it's uncertain exactly what that fee increase will be, if any, because obviously we have got a contract in place at the moment for them. So that's just my estimate of what it potentially could be. The second bit was about the collection rates. So this was a question about the debt collection agency. When COVID-19 started and the lockdown started, we did put a hold on all the work that has been done by the debt collection agencies, very much saying it wasn't appropriate to actually be aggressive on debt collection initially. We have now started back the work that they're doing, so the debt collection agency is still able to call people up by telephone. So actually there is still work being done by the debt collection agency, but you're right, we will need to potentially review that going forward, particularly as courts are no longer, or not open at the moment for actually firm action through the court process. But that's something that has been monitored. But very much the approach we're taking within Broadland is actually, if people have got real issues due to COVID-19, we'll be sympathetic with them. But obviously, if people can afford to pay, then we're still expecting people to pay in line with their payment schedules. The third area was about the payment process. Yes, I agree that actually, although we are having to make things done quickly when making purchase orders and purchases quickly, we are still following the procedures as soon as we can. So actually there's no reason why a purchase order cannot be raised and sent out within the same day. So there should be no reason why that can't happen. And obviously if there is anything urgent, that will come across my desk to actually say, yes, we'll make an urgent payment if it's a large sum of money. The fourth point was about the vacancies. My understanding is that the research officer is very much part of the overall team within the Democratic Services team. So actually it's not a specific post, it is part of the role of that team. and I don't have that information. I don't believe we were expecting to actually make any freezes of any of those posts within those Democratic Services team in this report.
Emma Hodds would like to come in.
Can I come in on this point, Chair, on the research
Yeah,
officer? I don't
you,
particularly want to go over old ground in this one, but the research officer isn't in there as a vacancy because that is a specific post on his own, is not in the structure. As we've discussed numerous times at committee, Sarah is fulfilling the scrutiny research officer role, and I have offered no savings in light of COVID from the Democratic Services team because, as I'm sure you can appreciate, we are extremely busy with meetings and virtual meetings, which probably, to be fair, take double the resource. So I have offered no savings as a result of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and Emma, I'd just like to come in on that as well. As far as the ONS research officer, the part-time officer that we had, last officer was Stacey, who serviced the committee. There was a dedicated trained position. The research positioning wasn't just put on officers within your team, and this is clearly a dispute between ONS and yourself. ONS made it very clear that we require that officer to be replaced under the old budget for that. Clearly, you're not doing that. So our position just remains as it is. And I guess your position remains as it is at the moment, which is we are still requesting for a fully trained, dedicated research officer on a part-time basis for ONS. And we've been saying that for a very long time, and we are still saying it. And I guess we are where we are. I'm moving on now. Next, who's the next one in, Linda?
No more questions.
Thank you. Okay. So can we move to the last part, Rodney?
Right, so very much the last part is I just need to carry out the whole report with the issues and risks, because obviously this is very early. These are best estimates in the figures, so there may well be changes. We may be having areas where we need to overspend or underspend, but actually the figures in the report are our best estimate at this point in time. And obviously there's some risks. Could there be a second wave of COVID-19, which might impact us again and have a big financial issue again? And the other big risk is about whether the government will provide any more funding. Obviously, we've had 2 tranches of funding, but there is still pressure nationally to say actually there are some big financial pressures in councils and there needs to be some additional government funding. So if we do get additional funding, we'll obviously report back in due course on that. And that very much leads us to the recommendations, which is set out in paragraph 11 of the report, and we'll leave that for members to debate.
Okie dokie. So we've got a few points that was raised in terms of the recommendation. Recommendation, as you can see, are 11 on page 37, 10.1, and 11.2. And I'm just asking also, before members come in, James here, just to help clarify, because I think we've had 2 or 3 come in terms of wishing to make a point for recommendations for us to consider. James, one is on the companies around BVR, other companies being mentioned in there somewhere. Another one was on the COVID situation around the SIL money. And there was a third one, which I'm just trying to find there, from Peter. There's a point that Peter had made. Can you remind us, Peter?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, if I just come in at that point, because the recommendations on page 37 are sort of the general recommendations, but there were a couple of points which were asking for the committee or cabinets and then committee to give a viewpoint on. So if you go through the report, page by page, on the first one, there was a change on page 30. That's where Councillor Bullman added about the BVR to consider the request in light of other competing calls on funding. Page 31 was about the broadband, where there was a recommendation, and 31 also.
And 34, wasn't it?
Yeah, and 31 you've also got about the parishes. Members are requested to endorse this approach. So it's so there's just a couple where they're asking for viewpoints, which are not necessarily in that general recommendation on page 37.
Exactly, that's what I just said somewhere.
Yeah,
so
just going to
to help with, which is what we do, is to actually clarify those points. I've got some notes here, so I'm just make sure we're on the same hymn sheet here, because I need to come back to the members in a moment around that in terms of recommendation. That's exactly what I just said. So, right. So in relation to, and we're going to need a proposer around each one of these, I believe, in terms of recommendations. So looking at the wording that you just read out, Sarah, in terms of BVR.
Yep.
If you could read that out, and then we'll see whether we've got a mover and a seconder for that.
Yeah, so it's to consider the request in light of other competing calls on funding.
Okay, so do we have a mover and a seconder for that being added in as an amendment to the recommendations?
Looks like Councillor Bowman has proposed, and we've got Councillor Nurden as well.
Okay, so that's a second. So that's a proposer and a seconder. Is that that's confirmed? So therefore, I'd simply ask committee at this stage, are we all in agreement? Sorry.
Just to ask, is there not going to be a time limit on that?
Time limit on what, sir? I'm getting a bit confused now.
Well, if it's going to be considered alongside other requests, at what point in time are we going to say these are the requests we've had, and can we consider them?
Yeah,
that isn't built in there.
No. Let me just straighten this up where we are. At the moment, we've had a debate. We've got to recommendations under 5.19, and Sarah's just helped to clarify the wording. Peter, during that debate, made the reference there, and I said we can come back to that on the recommendations. Now, what we've got now is a form of words that Peter raised in terms of that recommendation, that variant. The issue that you're now raising is a brand new issue. It's a brand new issue, which we will then come on to, if you wish to raise that in terms of proposing something of it as a second point. So I'm going to clarify. So I'm going to clear, first of all, if you can just hold on, Sue, clear this first of all. We've got a mover and a seconder around that. You've heard the form of wording that's been read out. I don't know if you want to read it back out again, because just losing the thread a bit, Sarah.
That's right. And can it just presumably that 5.19 still exists? So the priority, yes, my understanding, forgive me if I'm wrong, is that the priority is to assist the Bure Valley Railway to actually have an opening plan. So that's the priority. Yeah. And then, presumably if that's not possible, then we would consider their request for funding in light of other requests. Is that right? So really the priority is in getting them reopening. But it's,
yes, and the point that Peter's making and the amendment is actually to that. That's what it's to, isn't it? Exactly, yeah. So I'm now going to ask.
And I think Peter won't, but I think Councillor Bowman wants to come in. Perhaps he wants to propose.
Thank you. Hello, Peter.
Oh, let's just unmute him. Oh, I can't unmute.
Can you unmute Councillor Bowman? Because it's saying ask.
Oh, he's back.
My point was that I don't think there needs to be a specific timing to this, because it would only be considered when we have a reopening plan. So when we have a reopening plan, then it would be considered alongside any other competing priorities.
Yeah, Peter, I've actually, thank you for that, Peter. I've actually just covered this, because what we're doing is we're putting your proposal in the sector to that. If then after that, Sue wants to raise an issue about timing plan, then the point you've raised is actually a relative one, I would say, and that's a second point. So just structurally and constitutionally and procedurally, I need to deal with this in the correct manner as it's just been described. I'm now going to put to the committee, do we agree with that proposition? If anybody indicates that you do not, then we will move to a vote. So is that agreed?
Yeah, everyone has confirmed agreement. Councillor Adams, could you raise your hand? Are you in agreement, Councillor Adams? And Councillor Brennan? Yeah, so everyone is in agreement.
So, yeah.
Right, thank you very much. So we can move on to the other points, but before we do, because there's a couple of other points in the recommendation being raised, on the point that Sue's just raised, I'm just asking you, Sue, because you're raising this point in terms of any proposition, the answers that have come back from the officers and also the point that Peter made, are you happy with that?
Yes, provided it's going to respond to their request and go ahead very shortly.
Thanks, Sue. That clears that. Now we'll move on to because there was another two, Sarah, wasn't there? The other one is on the SIL money. I'm just searching the page now, actually, to find the original page.
31. Page 31, item 5.24. Some members being asked to consider whether the council should make a bid, and I believe there was a proposition.
Yes, that's right. So coming back to the proposition on that, Stuart had made a proposition on that, which I think is to support this and to add some kind of wording around urgency, I believe, as well. Stuart, would you like to come in? And
that's correct, Chair. It's basically to ask the council to proceed with this as a matter of urgency.
Okie dokie. So could we take that as a proposition in terms of wording, officers? So in the recommendation, we can make reference to the 5.2.
Yep.
And say, and this should be expedited. Other word, I don't know. Urgently.
You could have that the council should make a bid to the SIL infrastructure fund as a matter of urgency to further invest in broadband.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Yeah, everybody happy with that, Stuart?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put that to the. I'm presuming there's a seconder for that. Oh, seconder if there isn't. Is there? So I'm putting that now proposition to the committee. Could although sorry, if you're in agreement, please indicate now, and if you're not, somebody says no.
Councillor Prutton, are you?
Councillor Pruitt is indicating by crossing her arms. I'm assuming she means no on the vote on this one, to which she's nodding her head.
Yep.
Okay, so in that case, we need to go to a roll call.
Okay.
Okay, so we put that to a roll call.
Yes, can you please indicate if you're in favour of the proposition? Councillor Adams?
For.
Councillor Beadle?
For.
Councillor Brennan?
For.
Councillor Bullman?
For.
Councillor Catchpole?
For.
Councillor Hartley?
For.
Councillor Kelly?
For.
Councillor Karimi Guvanlu?
For.
Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Morrill?
For.
Councillor Nurden?
For.
Councillor Prutton?
Against.
Against. And Councillor Riley?
For.
Right. So that's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12 to 1. So that's carried.
Thank you. And then there was one final third point on this, which I remember now where I'm on this. Yeah, BVR. Sorry.
Well, I wasn't sure. Yeah, there's an issue about the payments to town and parishes, whether the members are requested to endorse this approach, which is basically to not necessarily assist parishes on page 31, 5.28.
Yeah.
It's just getting the committee's view. So it's, unless if someone wanted to put a counter proposal.
Yeah, this one is one that Grant raised, I believe, and that we did have some clarification back on that. That really we're talking about judgment calls here in terms of priorities coming forward. And I think the point that was being made is that there are priorities that are perhaps getting in front of that, and therefore there are some town councils with some reserves. I'm not sure, Grant. Are you seeking to propose an amendment around this one?
And I've also got Councillor Beadle and Councillor Catchpole. I don't know whether they want to.
Okay, I'll let them in after I've clarified with Grant, because Grant originally raised this point.
Yeah, I am not actually entirely happy with the idea or the concept of us making it a repayable loan to the parishes. So I just think that because it's the parishes are doing that or having that expenditure to support their communities, and Broadland is supporting its parishes. So I'm not entirely in favour of it being regarded as a loan, but if on the same basis that businesses are applying to the council for funding to support them, it's not a loan, it's a grant, and therefore I believe that the same approach should be taken with parish councils. So that's would you like to
propose that then before I move on to the other speakers?
Well, I don't know how we can word it in such a way as that, because they're asking us to endorse, and I'm just saying no, I don't want to endorse that.
Yes, but the recommendation is there. So we've got to we're going to get to the point then on the rest of the recommendations. So that would cause us a conflict. So we actually now need a proposal around what you are saying. I believe what you are saying. I'm just clarifying this with the officers as well. I believe you are saying that you're not in support of that being. Sorry, you're saying that you want the same criteria. Let's put it this way. You're saying you want the same criteria as applied to businesses, applied to parishes on a grant basis rather than a loan basis. Would that be what you're saying?
Effectively, yes, because they are supporting the community just the way that Broadland is supporting the community. So it's if they want to do something like expand or build a village hall or something like that as a parish council, then definitely a loan. But if it's work in connection with supporting the community, which is what that so-called 1.6 billion was going to be set aside for, is to support the vital work that you are doing in your communities.
Debbie Lorimer would like to come in. I've got a few questions.
I was actually going to ask Debbie to come in on this, because I think there may be a little bit of a confusion around what that is on 5.28, Debbie.
Could just clarify, and I think Mike Pursehouse might be able to as well. My understanding is that parishes and town councils have been encouraged to claim a grant from Norfolk Voluntary Norfolk Community
Norfolk Community Foundation.
Yes, that's it. Right, thank you. Towards the work of helping out in this COVID crisis, they actually should have money coming in for that. So this would, I believe this is more because they've suffered a loss of income or something like that, not for the cost of actually delivering the services they've done.
Okay, then my question goes back to why is that introduction there that the Secretary of State has said that it's to support the work that's being done in your communities. It's the work that's being done in the community. So if they have a huge demand that this Norfolk whatever fund is not able to fund, then they should be able to come to the district council and say, look, there is a gap. We don't want it to be a loan. We want it to be a grant that we don't have to repay, because it's work for the community. It's not work. It's not for something that as a result of COVID-19, we've got an underfunding on our building project, for example. It's as a result of community work and the community coming together, that the parish council is helping to fund. That's where my argument is, that it shouldn't be a loan, it should be a grant.
And I think, Councillor, if I can step in there, Chairman,
Yeah,
the Norfolk Community Foundation, they can either get a £1,000 or up to £10,000 specifically for helping their community. So we would always try and push them towards them first. So that's the important bit. So I mean, they've raised nearly £1 million in Norfolk to support that. And so if they then have a problem, and I think some of the ones it's where they've got a loss of income or receipt, for example, village halls and that's the kind of element then we need to get to. But I certainly think we should go there first to support directly community working. They have got up to £10,000 to do that.
Okay, that sounds excellent. Then also to just clarify further that whole point, if for example the parish council has got the what is it, that right to do business, what is it, general power of competence, that means that they can carry on and doing the same sort of thing that businesses can do.
Yeah.
If it's in those cases that they're asking for money, then they should be treated in the same way that other businesses. And so I'm also inclined to think that that should be a loan. But as I say, this is the paragraph is headed with what the local government secretary said, that it's work in the community. So I'm hesitant to. I think that whole paragraph needs to be reworked so that it's a lot clearer as to what we are requesting to endorse. As it stands, I'm not in favour of what is there. I understand, but it's too complex an issue. I think to just say yes, we endorse that.
I did have some other. I've got councillors Catchpole, Adams, and King. I'm not quite sure whether they still want to.
Can I just ask? I think there's some semantics here. I mean, the meaning of what's being said in 5.26, 5.27, 5.28, which is causing a bit of confusion around this. We'll let them in, but still trying to clarify that point.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yeah, please.
My understanding, what you're suggesting, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee should be recommending to Cabinet that if requests for funding for the parish councils come in, they should take these on a case-by-case basis and consider them for all the options for funding them.
Yeah.
So actually you're suggesting to Cabinet that actually that is what they should do if and when a council approaches us.
And that's on all, I mean, Ron, because that's on all of the various aspects of that, as you've just said, because that covers various things. Community, if they've got a business issue going on, that covers all that aspect. Brilliant, thank you very much. So we could put that in as a recommendation because I think that covers the point, Grant, then. Would you be happy with that? We put that in as a recommendation?
Absolutely happy with that.
Brilliant. So you move that now.
Yeah.
I'll second that. And before we put that to debate, I'm going to park it and now return to those other councillors. So what other councillors was there?
Catchpole, Adams, and King. I think they look in agreement now.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
You still wish to come in?
I was going to propose an amendment, but it's been covered by what the officer said, so no.
Yes, my point was just the same. We need the town and parish council applications to be considered on their merits, because each parish and town council will be in a different financial position with regard to reserves.
Yeah, brilliant, thanks. And who was the third one?
Councillor King.
My point was covered by Rodney.
Right.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's really helpful. So we've had a proposal, we've had a seconder now in terms of the wording on that. Did you capture that, officers?
Yeah,
I did. Yes.
Would you like just to read that out?
If a request from a parish council comes through, it would be taken on a case-by-case basis, looking at all funding options.
and the
Wonderful.
same criteria to be applied as it would be to a business. I think that was a key point as well.
If it's on a business premise, premise.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to ask if we are all in agreement with that. If you are not, please indicate we'll move to the vote. Are we all in agreement with that proposition?
So, sorry, can we distinguish between a loan and a grant?
We already have in that in the recommendation.
Because that covers a point, the same criteria be for businesses, that is a grant.
Criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the same position. So all those in favour, please show. If you do not wish to agree, please say, and we'll move to a vote.
Looks like you're all in agreement on that.
Yep, great. Thank you very much. So look, thanks very much, Rodney, and officers for the report. It was always knew this was going to be a long one, not quite as long as this, and also councillors as well. I'm actually going to say we need to have a 5-minute comfort break right now, and then return and see if we can get through the rest of the agenda.
Chairman,
sorry.
If I may, you do need to agree the recommendations on page 37. You haven't agreed those yet.
I'm really, really sorry. I've been saying that all the way through, haven't I? Sorry about that. You're absolutely correct. So, therefore, 11.1, 11.2, as amended, can we all agree those, please?
That looks, I think that's unanimous. Is Councillor Hartley in agreement?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think also that little slip there was partly due because I need a comfort break as well. So if we can move to a comfort break, 5 minutes, and then return, see if we can finish this agenda, please. Thank you very much.
It's now 11:52. What time are we returning?
11:52. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
11:57, please.
Make it 58.
Richard, Victoria, are you listening at all?
Yeah, Mike, I was just replying to your email.
No, you're live streaming, guys. Can you go on mute,
Okay.
please? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's just about.
Oh.
Linda, do we have everyone back in the meeting?
Yeah, I was just checking everyone's. We've had 13 again.
Can we do a roll call, please, to confirm everyone's back in the room?
Certainly.
Thank you, James.
Can you confirm you're in the room, please? Councillor Adams?
I am.
Councillor Beadle? Councillor Beadle, can you confirm you're in the room, please?
I can't see him on the list, James.
I can see him.
Oh, can you see him?
Yeah, he just needs to unmute.
Councillor Beadle, can you confirm that you're on the list? I was having a problem with sound a little while ago. There was no sound at all. So
James, it looks as though that the whole lot is frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen, hasn't it? Well, I'll leave Mr. Beadle for a moment. Mr. Brennan.
Here.
Mr. Bullman.
Yes.
Councillor Catchpole.
Yes.
Councillor Harpley. Councillor Harpley.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I didn't realise I was
Yep.
muted.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
No. Councillor Karimi Guvanlu.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Murrell.
Present.
Councillor Nurden.
Present.
Councillor Prutton.
Present.
Councillor Riley.
Councillor Riley, you're on mute.
Councillor Riley.
Muted yourself.
Yep.
Present. Yeah.
Right. And have we got Councillor Beadle?
I believe he's just left the meeting, but I'll admit him when he comes back in.
Okay.
And could you notify us of it? Sorry, could you notify the meeting of that when that happens, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Returning back to the agenda, item 7 and item 10 under cabinet report, insurance procurement, page 40. Could the officer please announce your title, name, and report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's Debbie Lorimer, Director of Resources. Hopefully this will be a fairly short item, I believe. So members may recall that back in March, there was a cabinet paper that came before review and scrutiny for peace scrutiny around us seeking consent, which was passed for us to try and award our insurance contract through the local government mutual. Unfortunately, as we got near the deadline, other members of who had indicated they were going to join in the mutual pulled out, leaving the council as the only sole remaining member in there, and you can't have a mutual of one, unfortunately. So that fell through. We are now proposing that we align the contract end dates with South Norfolk and move that to the end of September for two reasons, really. One, it moves the bulk of the work then out of clashing with the year-end work, so it helps us plan that piece of work in for the finance team, but also by aligning it in future, it should enable us to then have more opportunity when we go out to procure in future and hopefully seek some economies of scale. Zurich have agreed, therefore, to award us a 4-month extension, and in fact we should make a very small saving on there because they're pro-ratering the prior year's fee, so they're not applying any inflationary increase into that. And then they have agreed to award us a 1-year contract subsequently from the 1st of October to the 30th of September 2021. So that in the future then we can look at other options, including the mutual, and then we could potentially definitely go ahead with that because there'll be at least 2 of us, which is the minimum number you need to go ahead with that. So that is the proposal put in front of you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm actually going to make a point about this as well, just before I open it up for any debate questions, and that is that we are simply talking about an extension here, and then of course the issue of the mutual and all that becomes is subject matter for the future. All we are talking about here is the extension to 31st September 2021. Is correct, Debbie, isn't it?
Yes,
And that's
the way
in
it
the
has.
recommendation on 10.1 on page 42. Bearing that in mind, councillors, do anybody wish to ask questions?
Councillor Nerdon did indicate, I'm not sure whether he's still got one, and I've got Councillor Kelly and Councillor Prutton.
Okie dokie. Grant, would you like to ask your question?
Well, yes, I would like to ask the question, but I don't know if it's going to fall within the remit of what you were saying, because my concern is about the mutual. We were one of the founding members, so I just want to know if we are ever going to revive this mutual. Would we, by extending to the end of, by extending 4 months, is it possible that the mutual could be re-established within 4 months, or is it possible that it could be revived in by September next year? In which case we would then make a decision, because that was our favoured choice. That we would then take out the contract with a mutual rather than go open to a sort of like a tender process, just so that you know, we've agreed to go into the mutual. If the mutual is available by September next year, then we shouldn't be having an issue with going out to public tender or open tender.
So to come back on that one, the LG Mutual is certainly looking at its offer again, and the reason why we are saying or recommending that we actually extend to September 21, which is next year, is to give them sufficient time for them to sort of regalvanise and come back with a much better offer. So it is an extension for 16 months, but Zurich want it to be want actually 2 contracts, one for 4 months and then a year's contract. So that is a proposal in front of you.
Sorry, just to one of the things you mentioned is that they are is it possible that they will re-establish themselves to come up with a better offer before the 4 months is up, or is that before the 16 months is up?
That we did talk to them briefly about whether we could do it in 4 months, but there is a feeling that while COVID is on, is sort of top of everybody's agenda, that people may not give it their full attention, and that therefore it was better to wait the whole 16 months before looking again. However, it doesn't have to be done at any set time, so they may next March decide to launch it. That was up until then, but up to them to decide when they want to do that. But obviously councils can join in throughout the year. It doesn't prevent you from us going to them. Normally people's insurance or council's insurance tend to end either at the end of the financial year or midway through the financial year. So as I say, it may be that other councils take advantage next March, but it was felt that it would be better if we definitely went in 16 months' time, when there would be at least definitely 2 of us in the running.
Yeah, and just on that, I think on the report, page 42, that's the point on 9 conclusion that is really covering that ahead of the recommendation, Debbie, isn't it? What you've just clarified, I believe. So I think that does clarify.
Chair, can I just confirm Councillor Beadle has rejoined the meeting?
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, everybody.
Dokie. Wonderful. So I think that does clarify the point, Grant. Yeah.
Yeah, he's nodding.
Yeah,
Councillor
brilliant.
Kelly was
Kelly,
next.
yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Ben,
Yes, one for Debbie. I noticed in the item, terrorism is highlighted as a specific add-on item to it. Actually, what do we get covered for this? And is it a real necessity in Norfolk a rural where we don't have any problems with terrorism, or just as a point of interest?
It's obviously, you know, it does depend really what you purchase. I think this is traditionally what has been purchased and is part of the current contract. And when we come to look again at contracting in September 21, then obviously we can look whether we feel that that is a risk or not. It's one of those things, isn't it? If you don't have it and something happens, you can always kick yourself. Whether terrorism is a real threat or not, I don't know. I suppose we're talking about when there was a lot of Al-Qaeda terrorism at one point, and the risk was quite high, the threat of that, and public buildings. I really can't say.
Yeah, and also, Debbie, I think what you're saying is it's in the current policy. Therefore, when we're talking about the recommendation under 10.1 to extend, you're just extending what you have. So you obviously, that's not an issue at the moment. It's in the current policy, Ken. So when things gets negotiated in the future, that's a different matter. So I think that covers the point, Ken, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. But just for the future, if we can save £4,500 to do something far better with the residents, then I'd like to see that approach, please.
Okie dokie.
Councillor Prutton was next.
Yeah, Sue, fire away.
Just being pedantic again, please, but in paragraph 5.1, fourth line down, there's a rather vital date there that's incorrectly typed. That's all.
Apologies. Yes, Mr.
That's all right.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Sue. I did underline it actually just earlier on. Right, thank you.
Councillor Brennan's just rejoined the meeting as well.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, Martin. Anybody else? Linda?
Councillor Nairden, and then Councillor Beadle.
Okay, so Grant, and then I'll pick up Stuart.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, just a little bit more clarity from Debbie, if you don't mind. We've got a 4-month extension and then a 12-month extension. Did we not apply for a 12-month extension? Why did we only go for a 4-month initial extension and then a 12 month? Why did we not go for a 12-month extension on our existing contract? Was the primary reason behind that so that it could coincide with South Norfolk's renewal of their insurance contract? What was the motivation behind that?
So we want to align the to have coterminous end dates. South Norfolk's year end is the 30th of September. They will be extending for for 1 more year as well, so that we both end on the 30th of September 2021. It was Zurich who came up with we originally asked for a 16th month complete extension. They were the ones who came back and said, actually, we'd like to do it in a 4-month to bring you to the 30th September for this year, and then a 1-year extension. So that's where we've got to with negotiations with them. As I say, we've made a small saving because normally they would apply inflationary increase on every sort of, you know, on a year's extension. Our contract's actually for a 2-year extension. So they have actually been, you know, they've actually agreed to do it for 16 months.
Okay, so it's not a possibility that they would do it for a 12-month extension, and then possibly, if the mutual wasn't up and running effectively, that we could then get a further 4-month extension. In other words, turn it around and say, right, we want a 12-month extension, possibly adding on a 4 months if the mutual has not established itself as a proper organisation that can provide the insurance that we have agreed in the past.
And Rodney wants to come in here as well.
Yeah, Rodney, come in, please.
Yeah, so normally for insurers to agree a 12-month deal, they need lots of information provided in advance about claims history, any changes to building valuations and things like that. Therefore, in order for them to grant a 12-month extension now, we would have to be providing them with an awful lot of information, which we obviously haven't now got time to do, because actually it's been quite short notice when the mutual has come down. So actually, the only extension they would agree at the moment would be a short-term 4-month one. They wouldn't agree on commercial terms a 12-month one at the moment. And they'll only agree that 12-month one once we've given them that full set of information they need as part of a normal insurance renewal. Don't know if that helps.
And that was also one of the reasons of moving it to the latter part of the year rather than the end of the financial year, because obtaining all that information and that piece of work then clashes with the year-end production of the final account. So for the finance team, it's easier and spreads the workload better going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Rodney, for that clarification, because yeah, that was I can understand the question there, Grant, and I think that does actually clarify the terms of that. Would you agree?
He's nodded. Councillor Beadle is next.
Yes,
You'll
Stuart,
need to unmute.
would you like to ask your question, Stuart?
Councillor Beadle,
you need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can.
Good. Yeah, sorry about the interruption there. We had a power cut on a day like today, and it also sent our broadband line down for a longer period than the power cut. But there we go. Slightly different tack, Chair. Some of our smaller parishes, particularly the ones with parish meetings, the insurance policies they take out for mundane things like the village well and other such, in the scheme of it, as far as the district is concerned, relatively small items. The policies actually account for 50, 70, 80% of the council tax. Any chance of wrapping all these up into a policy provided by the district?
Because we have so many parishes and town councils, I think that would be quite an administrative burden for us to do. And also, if we were to make that offer, we would then be basically acting as a broker. We would have to go out to the insurance market ourselves unless we decided that we were going to almost act as a mutual. I therefore believe it'd be cost prohibitive for us to do that. And I think they can also get advice from the National Association of Parish and Town Councils too around that.
Yeah, I understand about the advice, but it still is a big cost for some of the smaller parishes.
Okie dokie. So, and I think Sue is next, Sue Catchpole.
No, there was no further questions. No.
Right, okie dokie. Okay, so moving to the page 42 and recommendation 10.1. Bear in mind it's an extension we're talking about here. Can we agree to that recommendation? And if somebody doesn't, please then indicate. We'll move to a roll call vote. So, do you agree?
Yeah, everyone looks in agreement. Yeah.
Thank you for that, committee. And thank you very much again, Rodney and Debbie. Moving on to just trying to find the page number. Item 11. Yeah, item 11, Armed Forces Covenant, page 43. Could the officer please announce themselves, their title and name, and report to this, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Victoria Parsons, Policy and Partnerships Officer. So
good afternoon, Victoria. I don't think you've reported to the ONS before, so
not for a while, no.
No. Yes, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So this is a report about the Armed Forces Employer Recognition Scheme, which rewards organisations that demonstrate or advocate support to the armed forces community and defence people. The scheme has 3 levels of award and can be broadly themed as bronze, so organisations making the commitment to supporting the armed forces; silver, demonstrating proactive support for when recruiting and employing defence people; and gold, acting as an advocate for defence people in the community. Broadland and South Norfolk councils were awarded bronze in December last year, and we submitted our nominations for silver in May. We should hear by early August if we've been successful. However, we have a clear ambition to achieve gold status. The report before you outlines some of the actions we're taking to achieve silver, including a VE Day celebration event, which unfortunately had to be postponed because of the current circumstances, but is now proposed to take place in November, in line with the Remembrance Sunday, in addition to proposals to celebrate Armed Forces Week, which takes place later this month. Most of the actions to achieve silver, and indeed gold, can already be accommodated within existing operational work and budgets. However, if we wish to make a realistic application for gold status next year, there is one area that will require cabinet approval in order to meet the set criteria. And that's the implementation of a policy for an additional 10 days paid leave for reservists. So reservists commit to undertake a minimum number of training days per year, which varies from reserve force. However, common to all is a requirement for a 10-day training period or exercise. Reservists can currently take unpaid leave for this, or they can use their allocated holiday entitlement. But for us to achieve gold, we would, as an organisation, need to offer reservists this paid leave in addition. As an illustration on costs, in adopting this policy, the increase in salary budget would vary from around £650 per year for someone employed at salary band A to just over £2,000 a year for someone employed at salary band J. As a high level estimate, we currently have 2 reservists working in the one team. If both were employed at the top of salary band J, it would cost the councils just over £4,200 a year. And that figure also includes the council's 29% on cost calculation. So just to summarise, while there is a budget commitment to implementing this policy, it gives us an opportunity to send a clear message to current and prospective reservist colleagues of the value we place on having their skills and experience working with councils. It also enables us to meet the set criteria by the ARS for us to achieve gold status. And it also recognises the council's commitment nationally to supporting our armed forces community. Any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll open up for questions.
Councillor Karimi Guvenlu.
Caroline?
Yeah, this is a very good scheme and I totally support it. But I just wonder, do we have a similar scheme for people who are special constables?
No, so if I can answer that, Chairman. No, we don't, but that's but there's no requirement for additional training, so special constables can do that within our flexible working arrangements already. So so there's no specific requirement for a special constable apart from their initial training, which is mostly done on the weekends, to then have to take. And the chunk of the armed forces is they have to have a 2-week block camp, which is normally in the summer months. So that's the specific requirement on them. Special constables have a different requirement.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if they're called up on an emergency situation, they might be called up. Would they be given leave to do that?
Yeah, so that's obviously that. Yeah, that's when they're different, and the same with armed forces. Once if they're called up for duty, then that's a whole different system. So yes, yeah, that's a different system. Yeah, so that's all catered for already.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I heartily recommend this, what we're looking to achieve with here. I'm an ex-RAF apprentice. I joined the RAF at 15 years of age, would you believe? We have many veterans throughout the whole of Norfolk, especially in Broadland, through specifically the air bases and the Anglian Regiment. So anything we can do to assist the veterans, which is within the policy here, I'm absolutely totally for. So I heartily recommend the recommendation to the members.
Councillor Catchpole, did you have a question?
Yeah. Sue?
Oh, and then Councillor Prutton as well.
So Sue Catchpole first, and then the other Sue second.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Yes, I agree. This is a good scheme, and therefore I would like to propose that we accept the recommendation.
Sue?
Me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm totally in support of it, of course, But why is it me that's going to be sweeping up after the Lord Mayor's procession? Because I do not like in paragraph 4.6 reference to the lodge and the house. Please, can we still retain Thorpe House? I beg your pardon, that was the school, Thorpe Lodge and South Norfolk House. And the other thing, can you see me doing a sitting room knees up all on my own? But that's quite all right. I think it's an excellent suggestion, and you can just have a laugh and think of Mrs. Prutton doing a sitting room knees up if you want to. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Tony?
Thank you very much. Well, funnily enough, it's to follow up on Sue Prutton's point, because exactly the same, the first bullet point 4.6 on page 45, I was going to propose that we delete the word the and insert Thorpe, and where it says the house, insert between the and house, South Norfolk House. And I would also like to propose that any future references always uses the phrases Thorpe Lodge and South Norfolk House. Thank you, Chairman. I'm formally proposing that.
Yes, we've actually made reference to this before, haven't we? Because it keeps on cropping up all the time. So Sue and Tony, yes, we can actually just make a mute point around that. I guess officers, in terms of that, we keep on saying the same thing over and over again. Is there any questions back on this? Because I actually wish to make a point before I do. No?
No questions, no more?
Okie dokie. Yeah. The issue around to achieve gold in terms of the paid leave is literally to have paid leave, then you get the gold award. Having negotiated with what was the world's second largest multinational for paid leave for service personnel, the only way that we could cover that, because we are talking about thousands of employees, by the way, the only way that we could cover that, and there was successful negotiations, was by also having costs and budgets set aside for absentee cover to be able to operate, because the post not being filled for those 10 days. So it was actually there was also another on cost in relation to the direct salary as well. Now, also that company was a business, so it was making profits, so it can budget it in terms of price, etc. So coming on to us as a local authority, I can see under 6.1 resources implication, and it points out there will be a small ongoing financial impact proposals are implemented. This can be met through a salary budget. Now, at the moment, we're talking, I believe, it's been reported that we have 2 employees in that category. I do think there's a bit of a risk here. And what the risk is, by the way, I do support it. As I said, I've negotiated for this in the past to get people paid. So I do support the principle, bearing in mind we're a local authority. If we had, out of, 600, 700 people we've got across 2 local authorities working for us, if we had 50 to 100 people becoming reservists, this would actually have a considerable impact on our cost base in terms of the budget, and in a considerable way. Also, if you look at direct workers that are employed, blue collar, for instance, in South Norfolk, we might have some ourselves, caretakers, etc. When those people are absent and they're paid, there's also consequences to that as well. So if we did have a, if we did have this policy, we've got to bear in mind that at the moment it looks like small numbers, but in the future it may actually be a big number. And I don't know what we can do about that, because once we've committed to this, we've committed to it. So that's just important. That's just in terms of pointing out a risk in terms of this. It's not just about the 2 that we've got at the moment. I don't know if the officers want to sort of respond on that at all.
Yeah, Chairman, if I can, I mean, we've had a look, and it doesn't. If you have a policy like this, all of a sudden you don't get hundreds and hundreds of people volunteer, because it's a massive commitment to be a reservist. But absolutely, I mean, this is just because we've set it now and we've got low numbers. Obviously, if this increased, then we would have to look at this policy again to see whether it's feasible. And there's no reason why, if we did start to get a huge number, we couldn't bring this policy back in and say, actually, we maybe cap it in the future to X number that realistically we can afford. The feeling at the moment is it's the low numbers now. We're in a period of flux anyway. So actually, in the future, if we do need to bring this out, back in and actually cap the numbers, then there's no reason why we can't do that.
Yeah, okay, and I think I appreciate that response. And of course, you can deal with it in another way, can't you? Because there's variance to these paying these reservists, and that is you can pay the full 10 days, or if the numbers beginning to impact upon cost, you can actually say, well, actually, it's 5 days we're going to cover, or it's 3, or it's 4, or it's 6. And personally speaking, I would like to just see a recommendation, just to state that in the future, if numbers increased and this did impact, that there would be a review of the policy. I'd personally like to see an amendment to that, just to reinforce what you're saying, Mike.
No problem at all, Chairman.
I can add that in, no problem.
Yeah. So the officers seem to be in support of that. Before I move to recommendation, because there's been nobody actually saying to the contrary on this, could the committee support that amendment? I'll ask for a seconder. Is that Caroline seconding? Okie dokie. So if I ask again for all those in agreement first, and then if not, we'll put it to a roll call vote. All those agree?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think that's unanimous. I can't see anyone in disagreement.
All right, thank you, Committee. So moving to recommendation 8, and I don't need a comfort break, James, so I'm on top of this time.
I think Councillor Adams wants to come in. Councillor Adams.
Councillor Adams?
Yeah, very briefly, Chairman, I did propose an amendment under 4.6, page 45, bullet point 1, that we delete the word "the" in both the case of lodge and house, and substitute Thorpe, Lodge and South Norfolk House, and that this be referred to in future, that this is how these two district council places are referred to in future. So, Chairman, I would be looking for a seconder for that one.
Chairman, may I come in on that point?
Yeah, and I think you're probably going to say the same thing.
I'll let you go, Chairman, and then I'll sweep up behind if necessary.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the point you're making, Tony. However, that's not the point of the report. That's about terminology, which I think does need to be addressed. And I think we can pick that up in another way in terms of the onus on this, in terms of a minute, and pointing this out to Cabinet and administration. This is what we'd like to see, because the recommendation is actually about the gold award, not the terminology in a sentence. So I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think you actually can't technically put that in as an amendment to the recommendation, because it's actually about terminology. It doesn't change the recommendation or affect the recommendation. So I'd just like to see what Emma sort of thinks about that.
Yep, can completely agree, Chairman. We can make sure that James records this in the minutes, and it will go through to Cabinet, and I'll make sure it's fed back to management team as well, but it's not something that would warrant a formal amendment.
Yeah. So is that okay, Tony?
Yeah, that's fine, Steve. Yeah, I fully accept what you're saying. It just annoys me that
it annoys me as well.
Thorpe Lodge is a listed grade 2 building in places. It's always been known as Thorpe Lodge. This to truncate it just down to the lodge, sort of, to me, significantly reduces the value of the grade 2 part of the building. And the same with South Norfolk.
And totally agree, Tony.
But I agree with you, Stephen. I agree with Emma. Yeah, fine. Yeah, it doesn't affect the recommendation. So yeah, fine. I'll withdraw it.
Yeah, but we are all agreeing, so just to clear the point really for clarity, we are all agreeing as a committee that that is the point we want to be made in the minutes and for the administration, as Emma said. We are agreeing that, aren't we? Yes?
It will be in the minutes.
Yeah,
certainly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so again, moving on to 8.1, 8.2. With the amendment as amended, can we recommend 8.1, 8.2 as written, plus the amendment, including the amendment? Can all agree, please?
That looks unanimous.
Yep.
Can't see anyone in disagreement. No.
Right, thank you very much, committee. So move on to the last item, which is a temporary change to housing allocation, and also ask the officer to announce themselves and report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair.
All right, I did forget to thank Victoria, by the way. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Richard Dunsire, I'm the Housing and Wellbeing Senior Manager for both Broadland South Norfolk Housing and Benefits team. I would put my camera on, but whoever is hosting it isn't allowing me to do so.
Oh.
Sorry, I know it was when my child had come in to us for something. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorted that
Sorry
out
about
for
that.
you.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you've heard from Rodney previously, the demand on homelessness service is absolutely spiked. The proposal which I'm bringing today is very much to try, is part of the processes I'm putting into place to try and mitigate this extra cost onto the council, but also it is about the money, but it's also about the fact that we have a lot of people in temporary accommodation and unsuitable accommodation that we need to try and get into more suitable accommodation. I'm sure you've all heard on the news that in March 2020, Dame Louise Casey introduced an everybody in process where we had to pick everybody up from the streets and put them into accommodation. We were very well placed to do this because we had our Rough Sleeper initiative in place, and since August we've been running a no second night out policy, so we only had 2 rough sleepers. This put us in a strong place. However, it hasn't made us immune from the increase in demand. What we found, and we kind of knew this, but what we found in both South Norfolk and Broadland is we have a lot of hidden homeless people. These are people who are sofa surfing. So they're in, they're okay to stay at a friend's for a couple of nights, and a family members a few nights, and another friend's a couple of nights. When lockdown came in, their options just dried up immediately. So we had this sudden influx of people. We'll also start this demand is an ever-changing beast as well, because we're now starting to see this move into family breakdowns as I'm trying to think of a word, but as the stresses and strains of lockdown start to show. So we normally have about 30 people between the 2 councils in transient temporary accommodation. These are bed and breakfast and our leased properties. However, we're currently sitting at 70. This demand is by no means going away. From Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we had another 5 people present to us, 5 households present to us needing temporary accommodation. The cost of this is normally we between 2 councils spend about £70,000 per year. That's about £6,000 per month. We are currently spending £32,000 per month. So a big pull on the homelessness service. One of the main drivers for this, we have one main drive for temporary accommodation is people coming in. The other way in which we resolve it is to get people out through houses. Normally, we would expect to have between 200 and 240 properties coming through during this period of time since the lockdown happened. So far, we've had 4. We've also, housing associations are starting to turn things around, and we are looking at hopefully having about 66 made available to us. However, as I've previously said, we've got 17 temporary accommodations, and we've got lots of people out there who also need those houses. So we're dealing with increased demand with significantly reduced supply. Within those people in temporary accommodation, there are quite a lot of people who are also not suitable for a house. But if we put them into independent accommodation right now, they would fail, and then they would come back to us as homeless. And we need to avoid that from happening. So I've nominated out of I know it says 66 people in TA. That was when I wrote this report. We're now up to 70, but out of 70 people, I've nominated 40 people into accommodation. However, that leaves 30 people who need supported accommodation. We're incredibly lucky in Bournemouth and Broadland and South Norfolk. We've got a lot of supported stock. The problem is they're all full. So we need to get people out of there who are ready to move into those independent accommodations as quickly as possible to open up vacancies for the people in our temporary accommodation to take those vacancies in the supported accommodation providers. The other things just to consider, as I said, we've got domestic abuse, we've got family breakdowns happening. But as maybe you've heard on the news, there's a further 2-month delay on evictions. That was announced on Friday. That's excellent news. However, in the back of my mind, I'm constantly worried that there is a latent demand which is sitting there waiting to come through. We're working hard with those people who are facing those that homeless, but that is just further demand on a reduced supply. DA domestic abuse calls at the moment to the domestic abuse services are up 30%. So we are anticipating and planning for that as well. The main thing is we need to get our limited TA resource ready, reduced first of all, and then ready with resilience to take on any future supply and demand which is coming through the system. So my recommendation is to allow for the throughput to happen and the move on to happen from supported accommodation is to amend the council's housing policy to allow officers discretion to place eligible and suitable individuals currently living in supported accommodation within the high category for allocation. However, we don't want to do this indefinitely. This is a response to the COVID crisis pandemic. So subject to recommendation 1 being agreed that this will be in place for an initial 3-month period and extendable to 6 months with the approval of Director of People and Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder. Any questions?
Right, so open it up. Who wishes to?
Councillor Adams.
Tony?
Just like to make an amendment to the second recommendation on page 48, and where it talks about approval of the Director of People and Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder. I'd like to add at the end of that, and the Chairman of Overview and Scrutiny. And that's again, Chairman, a formal proposal, because I think you should be there to as the Chairman of Overview and Scrutiny, keeping an eye on this. So I will formally move that.
Councillor Catchpole has a question to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, sorry, Sue, sorry to cut across you. Before we go on to that, we've got an amendment from Tony that we need to deal with, please.
Well, we will be dealing with that in if there is an amendment, of course, it comes under recommendations, Emma. But just in relation to Tony's point, I lost sound at the beginning of what Tony was saying. I've actually lost the plot here slightly because I did lose some sound at the beginning. Could
do you want me to come in?
Yeah,
I'll come in. Yeah, so it's on page 53. It's the second part of the recommendation, talking about extending it to 6 months with the approval of the Director of People and Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder. Councillor Adams was suggesting that we add the Chairman of Overview and Scrutiny, so you'd have an involvement in that decision. So that was the amendment.
Well, I actually, sorry, I've actually lost the blooming recommendation. Oh, there it is.
Page 50, have you got it? Yeah, 53 at the top.
72, subject to recommendation.
Yeah, so just basically add Chair of ONS at the end.
Initial pre-managed services, approval of Director of People and Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder. I think Emma's going to have to come in on this because as far as I know, that is not possible for me to do that under the Constitution as it's constructed. So could the government, so it's probably Emma actually, just come in and clarify that?
Yeah, happy to come with that, Chair. No, I wouldn't recommend that as an amendment. I think your role as Chair of Overview and Scrutiny is just that, is Chair of Overview and Scrutiny.
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's a delegated decision, that will be documented. However, I would urge against you as Chair of Overview and Scrutiny be involved in that decision because it would compromise you.
Yeah, I agree, Emma, because the position of overview and scrutiny is that as the counter. So if I'm involved in that process, again, I think there's actually a constitutional issue around this, Emma, as well. I think that that's actually not possible. So I understand Tony's reasoning for that, and I can understand that, and I've got absolute sympathy for it. But it's not actually; it causes a real conflict with ONS, for sure.
Okay, yes, Steve, I'll withdraw it if that's the view of you and Emma. As I say, I'm quite happy to withdraw it.
Thank you, Tony. But I do actually agree with this, with the direction of what I know the reasoning why you say it, Tony. But again, this would be subject to, for instance, if there was a portfolio holder decision, of course, that would be subject to calling, even though it's delegated through to the Director of Peoples and Community. So, but if there's a portfolio holder decision along the way, then that's subject to calling, of course, by scrutiny. Right, so was Sue Catchpole next?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Sue. Sorry.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you, Lindo. Go ahead, Sue.
Page 52, the conclusion. I've read this and it disturbed me, but I'd like, if possible, if Richard could tell us what is meant by what is written, please. And then I'd like to come back.
So this is, sorry, what point is 6.1? Is that what you're referring
Page 52, 6.1.
So is that the conclusion on the report? Because I've got 7.1 where my conclusion on my report, sorry.
Oh, yes, it's our conclusion, 6.1.
So as I've written there, we have been very successful in finding accommodation for everybody who needed it during this crisis. My real concern is it could be very easy to for this to become our new norm of having 70 people within our temporary accommodation, and we're trying everything to reduce that. It's a sensible thing to do for a number of reasons. The first of which I can't help but deny is regarding money. It's a big demand on our council budgets, and we need to reduce that wherever possible, especially looking at in reference to what Rodney was saying today. The other thing is, when you've got 70 people in temporary accommodation, you have to manage those 70 people in temporary accommodation, and that is a massive demand on our service. The people who are facing these kind of situations are not the easiest people to manage while they're in temporary accommodation, and the best place for them is to be in some supported accommodation. The third thing is, with the reduced supply, we could be in a situation where it's one in, one out, and then this will be sustained. And if we don't give the people currently in supported accommodation the opportunity, that will remain silted up. It will remain saturated because there are people in our temporary accommodation in gold or high band, sorry, for Broadland in high band. So they will basically take the properties before these people in supported accommodation, and we will end up with a temporary accommodation, which is essentially our own run supported accommodation block, which would be a humongous demand on the service.
Sue, do you
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, when I read it, I think it's the way that it's worded, kind of suggests that people shouldn't be homeless, and we shouldn't be providing temporary housing if they are. And this just reads slightly too political for my mind. I'd prefer it to suggest that we would continue to house anybody that needs it, rather than to suggest that we need to limit how many people we house who are homeless.
Okay, that please be assured that was never my intention
Yeah.
to write it in that way. Okay.
I can see the semantics that Sue is talking about. It is actually written in in a kind of confusing way. I'm believing, in actual fact, that's not your intention in here, but could you just reread it and then just re-clarify it?
Thank you, Chairman. And what we'll do, and for Councillor Catchpole, certainly it's, you know, having reread it myself, it's certainly not the intention that to do it in that way. And what we'll do is we can amend that so that it reads better. But yeah, it's our intention to make sure that no one has a second night in on the streets, and we do support people as much as possible, and it's very much the intention of the council and us.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question, Mike, as well? Now we get into a little bit of a problem with when this occurs. So the wording that's in there, Mike, you're saying that you can reword that, but when this goes to cabinet, of course, that won't be reworded. I don't think there's actually a facility, Emma, going back to you on this as well, where you can actually change that wording before it goes to cabinet, can you?
I think what we can do, Chair, is we can deal with it as you'll obviously be at Cabinet. I think it's worthwhile if we, as Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, you raise that point in Cabinet, and that can be addressed so that Cabinet are aware of the comments that were made in Overview and Scrutiny, and then that can be clarified to Cabinet at that point.
Okay, can I also make another suggestion on that as well? If would it be Richard doing the report or Mike doing the report at
it'll probably be
Cabinet?
Well, maybe one or either of us, but I'll certainly be there, Chairman.
Okay, so under 6.1, excuse me, before I raise it, because you'll be, doing your report first, if you could make reference to that, that would be really helpful. Then I can come in and support that then from the ONS clarification as well. I think that would just be a helpful situation.
Councillor Harpley has a question.
And I think that covers, I'm just closing this down with certain mode. So I think that deals with it. So yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Natasha, would you like to put your question or clarity?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify something with the push to get people into accommodation. Will there be people who are suitably trained, particularly regarding domestic abuse, to make sure they aren't pressured into accepting unsuitable accommodation? Because I have met quite a few people who, in their hurry to get somewhere that's safe for them and their children, they've perhaps been placed close to an ex-partner, or it's pushing them to be somewhere where they're going to have to make their kids change schools. I understand we have to save money, and I want to see people housed, but having people who are recognising the broader situation here, not just numbers, allocations, about why people need to be in the right location. So is there an awareness, and are we not going to try and push people just to offload them?
I can assure you, we don't push people. What we have to do is, especially at the moment, is explain the realities of the situation which is out there. People are allowed to refuse properties, so we're not just telling them that they have to take it. We're linking people up to properties, and then especially within domestic abuse, we give people the right to refuse it. Also, when we're looking at the nominations, we make sure that we work with any support teams which are linked to that person to make sure that we are not nominating them to. So say they were fleeing from Aylsham, the last thing I would do is put them anywhere near Aylsham. And similarly with if we're fleeing from Norwich, I would always look to go as far away from Norwich as possible. But the challenge we often face with domestic abuse is people need to flee, but the pressure that puts on people to then move their children's schools then causes issues. But if a partner who they're fleeing from, all they necessarily have to do is then go to the person's school and then follow them home. So domestic abuse is a very, very difficult challenge, and it's often unfortunate that the person who is fleeing is having to make those challenges make those difficult decisions through no fault of their own whatsoever.
Thank you.
So no, we're not pressurising, but we do have to be realistic about what the options are out there.
Good. I'm glad you're aware of the issues. Yeah, I'm glad they are actually aware, because I do think that, having met women myself who've just felt the need, they've got to go somewhere. Your primary instinct as a parent is to protect your children. You've been offered a roof over your head, you'll take it because you need to do that, and people are pushing them, but perhaps there's an exploit. A lot of these people have a history of domestic abuse. It's not the current one they're fleeing from. There's 2 or 3 boyfriends down the line. I'm not saying it's just women who are on the receiving end and men are the perpetrators. Let's clear that out there as well. But that is unfortunately the higher statistics. So, you know, so long as there are good relationships with these people, so they are able to say, this area isn't particularly good for me either, and people aren't pressured just so we can offload them. So that's good you are aware of those situations. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie has a question.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, I've also got a question on 5.3, but I'll let Stuart in first. Stuart?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This subject is very fraught. To say it's very fraught is an understatement. The underlying thread through this report is that the council needs, I mean, it's probably that is the best word, needs to reduce the number of people coming forward. And I'm a little bit worried because it's not just domestic abuse as in the report, it's a lot of these people have chaotic lifestyles. They're not just couples, they're single people as well. And the report does say that under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be at the top of the waiting list. And I'm just a bit, now I'm a lot concerned about what's going to happen to all these people when we go back to the way we were. And I don't think we should go back to the way we were. I don't know if the officer can help with that conundrum.
So the main purpose of the allocations policy is to balance supply and demand. Okay, and it normally works with people being on medium. That will give them enough of an opportunity to move on from supported accommodation. The problem we're facing right now is a massive decrease in supply of properties. So that means that people moving on from supported accommodation are very, very unlikely to get that property that we need them to get for someone from temporary accommodation to move into that supported accommodation. So what this proposal does is kind of equals out the playing fields a little bit to provide them with a better opportunity moving forwards.
And just to add to that, thank you, Rich. Sorry, Chairman. Just to add to that, Rich, I mean, you know, this is very much a short-term situation and short-term resolution. You know, this doesn't change the nature of what the council does, and that is to, one, prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, and if they are homeless, is to get them back into sustainable accommodation as soon as possible, because being in temporary accommodation is not a nice place to be in. And so obviously what we want to do is to move people out as quick as possible. So it's exactly the same ethos as Broadland Council has always had. It's just a small amendment to try and get us through this next period when we've dealt with that increase.
Do you mind if I just add on one more thing? This is in no way about demand management. If anything, it's about supply management. We are still going to be helping people and providing temporary accommodation as we have been doing anyway. It's more about making sure that there's that throughput in the housing system that we need to allow to continue to provide that support to people who need coming forward in the future.
Can I also just clarify this? I think part of the issue here is there are terms that are being used that are not necessarily readily understood by everybody.
Sorry.
When you talk about supported accommodation, temporary, gold, and I think this is part of the problem. I think there's a kind of predisposition here, thinking that all of that is clearly understood, what is going on at the moment, and then how this overlays with that. And it comes back to the point I think also that Sue is making her own in that conclusion. You can see that in there. It's definitely there for me in terms of 5.3 and equality implications. When you look at 5.3 and equality implications, it's problematic, actually, the way that's written. So if I could just say this, because I think this might actually help. Supportive accommodation, people end up in temporary conditions. So you can have somebody, a teenager, this is quite a common event actually. You made reference to the sofa surfing. So you have a real issue going on. It could be something with the parents. It could be perhaps abuse going on in the house. And then all of a sudden you have somebody who's homeless, sofa surfing, and there's a lot that are hidden in that. Absolutely, I'm aware of that as well. Then all of a sudden they appear. And then you need to somehow give them temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation, as Mike said, is not very pleasant. You've then also got to then move them on to, they will not be suitable at that point for a number of reasons, into moving on to a housing association, gold standard for placement in terms of a house or in terms of Norwich, etc. So between that step, you also have supported, tell me if I'm wrong on this, you have a supported accommodation. And one of the organisations previously, I don't know if we're still operating via YMCA on this, one of the organisations previously on this was YMCA. So therefore there'll be some money paid to those. There's that person then goes into somebody's house, they're signed up on a contract and they pay some part towards the rent. They also take care of their room, they learn how to take care of themselves and wash up, and they eventually get into a gold standard position so they actually can sustain a rent and can sustain, even on benefits, sustain a property. And they're the steps. So I think that's where there's been some confusion in the terminology, is kind of thinking that this is all understood. And what we're talking about is emerging people into temporary accommodation, and there's been an increase. Then there's also an issue in terms of supported accommodation, and then moving on from that into housing. So I think that's what you're actually saying here, is that demand increase now means that you need the ability to be able to get that supply in place where you need to get it. One example, I'm guessing, which actually is connected in a way, is the use of Jaguar buildings down at RF Coltishall, where that's been used as a temporary situation to house up to 20 families. It's a sudden need that's occurred, and also connected with COVID. Now, if I've kind of, I hope that it's helped to sort of clarify what I think you mean. And could I just ask, is that the case?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's exactly it. It is how, I mean, unfortunately, we like to make our jobs sound very complicated, but largely the housing team is there to create throughput, to manage that supply and demand, and make sure that those people who need it get access to those properties and get the most priority. But largely, our jobs is to ensure that throughput happens, and by the way in which you've just described exactly the same, the throughput from someone in temporary accommodation into that supported accommodation or YMCA or Genesis, then someone from YMCA Genesis moving through to a housing association property. So it just creates that step-by-step throughput, so we can make sure we have plenty of supply within the whole sector. This is largely to kickstart that once again.
Yeah, and again, the wording under the equality implications looks as if, in actual fact, there could be a detriment going on here in terms of the way that's worded. If you reread it,
it's true though, because the problem we have is we have a lot of people who need houses, and not, especially right now, not enough to go around. So by putting people in supported accommodation within high or emergency, you're not creating any more houses, you're just creating more competition within that banding. But I think my personal view is it's a necessary thing to happen to ensure that throughput does occur, or we are going to be at a point where this is from now on business as usual, and we would like to restrict that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's just that point there that is the last point to clarify on this. I think that's the point that's caused concern, and might be in some other councillors' minds as well, around business as usual. And then this becomes a norm. And I think there's that little bit of understanding there, what you mean by that, in terms of the current criteria and future criteria. If you could just explain that, it might be helpful.
So all I mean by business as usual is we're currently set up to manage circa 30 people within our temporary accommodation at any one time. We're now seeing it's at 70, and I have unfortunately, I anticipate that without steps being taken, that might go up further. we're not set up as a council for that, and it doesn't need to be that way, because we have the resources within the districts to meet that demand, albeit through our partners. Therefore, because if I can, in the nicest way, if I looked after all the supported accommodation providers myself, I could just kind of move things around as if it was just we were moving people around, all for the right reasons, but I could move people around because people are in partner organisations, but the policy will allow for that to happen, and that's why we have to make these temporary amendments to the policy.
Yeah. So I think that helps to clarify. As I said, the wording, the way it's written in there, presumes there's an understanding around certain, the way this actually works, but also the way it's worded gives a kind of impression you're actually talking about something in it that would be detrimental, and it's actually not that when you read that wording there.
I think what I need to do is change a lot of the wordings around, because what we are doing is making sure that there are really good customer outcomes out there. Yeah, and it's not about reducing demand, it's about making sure that those who need it most get the best outcomes, and the people in our temporary accommodation are the ones that need it most. So I will reword it to that effect.
Particularly because it says equality implications, it's really important. I'm suggesting that does get reworded. Equality implications. And actual fact, I'm not sure you are saying there are equality implications.
Oh, yeah.
We can have a look at that, Chairman.
Yeah,
and
we'll have a look at it.
You see what I mean?
And I can see where the ethos is. Yeah, he's trying to get to. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor King has a question.
Again, just before we finish. So again, if you could just cover that for us under the equality implication again at the cabinet, and then I can come in and support that again. And again, Emma's there listening to this as well, and I think that really be helpful.
I just think it might be helpful, Chair, as well, just sitting here reflecting on this. We could table those amendments at Cabinet. I think that might be helpful so that councillors can see that worded as well. We can assist and do that.
Okay, so the officers could table the amendments on the wording. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think we've had comments from yourself with regards to the equalities statement, and we've had comments from Sue Catchpole with regards to the conclusion. I think, as we said, officers can talk to that at Cabinet, and obviously you can feed in from overview and scrutiny. But I think because we've had a lot of discussion, it would be worth tabling that so that all members can see what officers are trying to say in terms of those 2 points.
Right. So
I just think it would assist with understanding for members.
So tabling that, do you mean that the officers do indeed rewrite that to help?
We can do one, because we're in virtual meetings. I would suggest that what we do is ask them to make those amendments, and we can send those amendments around to members, as we would if we were in the council chamber. We would table, wouldn't we? So we'll do that, albeit virtually. We will email around those changes so that members are clear what those changes were.
Wonderful. That's really, really helpful, Emma. Thank you very much. And so I think we can all, before we move on to the next one, I think we can all agree to that, can't we? Can we? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone in agreement.
To be unanimous, yeah.
Thank you, committee and the officers. But we're not finished yet because there is somebody else. Who was it?
Councillor King.
I was just saying I'm running out of time. I've got a meeting to get to at 1:30. So
we're all running out of time, Councillor King. Is that the point?
Yeah, that was my point. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Right. So anybody else? Because I think we can move on to the final recommendation here. If not,
no questions. No.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. So the recommendation, but bearing in mind we are also minuting this as well, the terminology under 6.1 and also 5.3 is going to be amended. The officers have got that recorded there. So under 7.1, do we actually, just actually, Emma, on tabling that, I'm just thinking, under 7.1, do we actually need an amendment where we're making a point about that 5.3 and 6.1 to assist in that process?
I don't believe so, Chairman. No, because they're, I would say that the recommendations are as standard. You've just asked for that clarity on those points.
Brilliant. Okay. All right, okay. So on that basis, then, can we agree to the recommendations?
Councillor Catchpole.
Oh, sorry, go on, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Just one last point. How will it be measured so that when it's reviewed, you can see whether this change in policy has been successful?
The simplest answer, there's qualitative and quantitative there. So we'd first of all look at the amount of people and the amount of successful outcomes we've had through placing people into support accommodations and the impact that's had. The quantitative is going to be quite simply how many people we've got requiring further support accommodation within our temporary accommodation stock, which I hope through these measures will be significantly reduced. Just for information, I mean, just yesterday I've got 12 potential people who will be able to move on through support accommodation through our providers, who will open up 12 spaces from people who are in our temporary accommodation. If the danger of what's happening is, I don't think lockdown and everything's going to stop tomorrow and people will be welcoming these people back in as sofa surfers. But we've got a real opportunity here to help a catchment of people who we didn't know about for quite a while, or we have known about and they've come in and out of our services. We've got a captive audience that we can now help, which will hopefully reduce the future demand on our service moving forwards.
Yes. Okay,
Thanks.
Sue.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move to the recommendation now. So we've got recommendation 7.1 and 7.2. Propose that we agree that. Can we please indicate we're all in agreement? If not, we move to a vote.
That looks to be unanimous.
Right, thank you. And I believe, James, if I'm not mistaken, that brings us to the end of the...
That's the end of the meeting.
The end of the agenda. I know it's been a long meeting, but Zoom is very difficult. And of course, the cabinet issue on the budget is really where we lost the time. But we've done a good job of scrutiny today, I think. And well done, everyone. Well done, officer team. Thank you very much. And the officers reporting and for dealing with it in the way that you have. Thank you very much. See you next time, next channel.